CAP's infrastructure, there is a need for comprehensive work on understanding and evaluating the African capital market to come up with innovative partnership arrangements that will help to harvest Africa's agricultural wealth, which is currently unfairly exploited. The initiative is set to establish 5 large transboundary agro-industrial zones in suitable agro-ecological areas in each of the 5 geographical regions of Africa, consisting of mega agro-industries and food supply corridors. Each agro-industrial zone will be dominated by specialized agricultural commodities to produce enough of the commodity to gradually offset the import bill. The common African cities generated by the CAPs will be home for millions of young Africans who are desperate and have to challenge big oceans for a better life abroad, and home for the African diasporan who is looking for better investment opportunities upon their return home. The CAPS is jointly coordinated by a few global strategic partners such as UNIDO, IFPRI, UNECA, and FAO have been engaged as partners in the establishment of the initiative, leading to the undertaking of feasibility studies for some identified CAP demonstrations projects to be implemented in the coming years and to generate experiences and lessons that will guide the whole process of establishing the bigger CAPs. Join us and let's talk about the Common Africa Agro Parks program. The African Union has in its ambitious Agenda 2063
1, 2. Okay. What began as a very wet and cold morning is now beginning to see a hope and a ray of sunshine for which we can sing, I can see clearly now, the rain has gone. I can see all obstacles in my way. And if you believe it, let's sing together. Boom, boom. Here is the rainbow we've been praying for. Together we sing. It's gonna be And such is the afternoon we are going to enjoy. Please put your hands together for yourselves. And so with the blessing of our chair, we proceed with the second plenary. My name is Jerry Ajololo, and I welcome you warmly. I know it's quite tiring coming back from lunch. This is where you see God in 3D. But I'll try with all the powers at my disposal to make you awake and active. What we want to do this afternoon is to engage in a series of very thought-provoking conversations in line with our theme. Oh, why won't you help me celebrate the panel from the first session? Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for their excellencies. They did a yeoman's job. Wow. I'm particularly touched by the words of His Excellency Olusegun Obasanjo, who asked us to migrate from agriculture to agribusiness, amongst many other submissions that came out. This afternoon, we want to proceed in the same light, promoting intra-Africa trade and unlock agricultural potential in Africa. To do that, we will explore this theme from 2 angles. The first will be the role of Africa's partners to support the success of the AFTA. And the second, ladies and gentlemen, will be the market as a driver for fostering agricultural productivity in Africa. But we want to lay a foundation for the first panel, which is unlocking agricultural potentials in Africa. Here to do justice to that is the program director for the Forum for Agricultural Research in Africa. Make welcome Dr. Anselm Vodun-Hesse. Unless your lunch wasn't good, please let it be warm. You have exactly 15 minutes to do justice.
Okay, thank you. Do you have the remote? Thank you, Moderator, Excellency President. Good afternoon and bonne digestion, colleagues. Good afternoon, and I'm talking here on behalf of the Bob African Union Commission, FARA. So my name is Anselm Vodun-Hesse. I'm the program director, coordinator of the Common African Agro Park. So I work for FARA, and FARA is a forum for agricultural research in Africa. And FARA works closely with the African Union Commission in implementing all agriculture-related agenda, and we actually support the EU in implementing, most importantly, the CAADP agenda and all the agriculture-related goal in the African Agenda 2063. So one of the work that we actually done in support of the African Union was the CAADP biennial report that was mentioned by His Excellency this morning, and we developed a tool that actually was able to show how African countries are performing when it comes to implementing the Malabo Declaration. And Ghana was one of the countries that actually show concrete way of translating the political will to political action and was awarded that period. So in 2019, FARA was assigned with the role to coordinate the Common African Agro Park program. So this afternoon, I'll be talking on behalf of the 4 institutions that are coordinating this program, and mainly here. I'll also be talking on the blessing on the Excellency President who are actually sitting with us here. So I have 2 major parts for my presentation. First is actually to show a bit what we actually call the potential of Africa, that we see more as opportunity, and also highlight a bit how the African Common Agro Park was designed, and then the video was already shown, so this one will be skipped actually. So in terms of potential, I cannot say more than what I've been saying this morning in terms of the possibility that our continent has when it comes actually to its potential. And you see how big is Africa, and bigger than all those countries that we see on the screen, you know, in terms of geography. And our actually cities are growing by 25 million of people every year. And you have a 2.1 trillion of household consumption. And more is happening, even though we are facing some challenge. More is happening in terms of productivity. And when you talk about productivity, it means that people are actually getting more income. And more income means that there are more demands coming actually on the continent when it comes to supply, you know. Supply also in terms of quality foods. So more will be coming in the coming years for us actually to be able to serve good food to our African continent. And we have a market of 1.3 billion of African that we actually need to serve for the coming years. And that figure is actually some figure that's not static, it's increasing. So in the next, by 2050, we see this figure of 1.3 almost doubling actually. So that's how we can see how we are moving, you know, from 2020 up to now in terms of our population increase. And what is specific for Africa, Africa actually in terms of population is increasing, while the other continents actually they are having a population be stagnant. And by 2030, it's already predicted that Africa will be having the world's largest workforce, actually. So it's something that actually very important, and we should actually know how we are doing with our manpowers. And most of you know what's happening on the continent, and President Obasanjo was saying that if you don't treat them well, they'll become the next Al-Shabaab group. So we also have land when it comes to actually production. And Africa is having more than 60% of the fighting line of the world. And we have water, we have all the natural resources. And when it comes to money, there's a lot of complaint that we don't have money. But the money is there. Africa has money. You know, we are having money that's more than 9 times the foreign assistance, the money that we're asking from donors. And when you look at actually other potential source, here I show some few figures in terms of pension fund, for example. We have a figure that was reported as 260 billion of pension fund in 2013 by the African Development Bank. And we have diaspora fund that is more here than 398, thousand billion. So the money is there. We also have potential people who can actually invest, in developing the capital of development in Africa. And all this showing that actually our future is bright, and we should be positive when it comes to looking at who we are and what we are and what we have actually. So the problem that we are facing today, and that's actually why we are actually all the time meeting how to discuss that, is this problem of import. We are stuck with import. Africa is importing a lot, and we are also importing a lot when it comes to food commodity. Africa is importing up to 90 billion every year. The right figure that you are seeing actually is starting from 2016. You can see how this figure has been improving up to 2018, where it's reached 92 billion. Now, because of COVID, yes, it has reduced a bit, and we are above, a bit above 90 billion. But what is always predicted is going to happen, and we need to stop, is that actually prediction of that food import bill being about 110 billion every year from 2025. We should not get there, actually. And one of the commodities that you are actually importing a lot is the rice. You all know here how Africa is spending a lot in bringing the rice on the continent. We are also bringing maize on the continent, to import. We are also bringing a lot, we're importing a lot wheat, And I have this chart that shows actually how the commodity that we are, let's say the 10 most imported commodity actually in Africa. And here you can see wheat is the first one, maize, the second one is rice, the third one. You can see, for example, for the rice, we have to spend about 13 billion to import about 31 million of tons of rice on the continent that has all these resources. And what's happening is that if you look at how our production, like the production is what you see in red, and the consumption is what you see in gray. If you see how our production level is compared to our consumption level, is very low, actually, meaning that we are not producing enough what actually we are consuming. And that is the main reason why we keep importing. And anywhere we export, we are not exporting processed food, we are exporting raw food. And also, you see one of the particular commodity, cassava. Anyone here can think that cassava, we never import cassava, but Africa is also importing cassava. You can see even our production level against our consumption level, how the difference is. And President Obasanjo talked a lot about chicken today. You can see even though some of the countries are making effort in producing chicken and eggs on the continent, we are still actually stuck with our level of production. Our level of production is still lower than our consumption, whether it comes to eggs and also to chicken or also to turkey and so on. But the good news is that some countries are doing their best, based on the commitment that they have taken, the political action that they have actually taken, they are doing something that actually helping us to address some of the issues that we are facing. And Nigeria is one of them. Nigeria actually is doing a lot, to stop importation of rice. So it's one of the countries that is importing a lot of, producing a lot of rice, and is larger on the continent now. And when you look at also in terms of those who are consuming, Nigeria is also one of them. You can see on the screen here, Nigeria is one of the countries that is eating a lot of rice, Madagascar and all those countries that you can see also on the screen. I also want to say something on the maize. Yes, South Africa is actually the largest production when it comes to the maize. So because they have infrastructure, they are trying their best, to make sure that they reduce the post-harvest stock, make sure they have really quality product, to continue. So South Africa is one of them. When we look at those who are consuming, for South Africa, actually also one of them are consuming, and you can see on the map the consumption, the 10 top consumption in terms of the maize. When it comes to the wheat, Egypt is actually making a good case here, being a larger production. But the production level of Africa in terms of wheat actually is still low, actually. And you can see what's happened, here in this map. First, you see, those countries that are actually eating a lot of maize, wheat. You can see Algeria and Egypt itself. And when the Ukraine and Russia war started, that's where everyone had attention on that particular commodity. And we found out that most of the wheat that we are importing are coming from Ukraine and Russia. And you can see a lot of statistics coming up at that particular period in terms of who are the countries who are depending on those two countries when it comes to importation. And the map actually is telling more in terms of who are the countries depending on being affected by the Ukraine war when it comes to importation wheat. I have some things very small to say on the cocoa, because the cocoa was discussed a lot this morning. The President Nana has actually done my job, giving actually the state of what's happening, in Ghana. But I just have a very few figures chart here to show you how our production and our consumption level. We are not even consuming, cocoa. But what's happening most, in Africa, we actually leading the production, actually. And when it comes to cocoa bean, comparing the import and export, we don't even import, we export everything when it comes to cocoa bean. So it's important that I show this with you and show you also the countries that you actually produce cocoa on the continent. And the first in Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana is the second one. And all the 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 countries that you see, they are producing 99% of the cocoa actually for the continent. And most of our cocoa actually is going to Netherlands. And you see, we are having a 75% in terms of contribution to the world production of cocoa, with this value of about 11.5 billion. But the value when it comes to what come out after the possession is higher than that. Our own is just actually few, in terms of things happening the way we want, actually. And the critical issue that we actually need to address is actually what is on the screen, is actually our trade barriers. And a lot of our communication this morning actually are talking about that. And this is one of the things that we need to address to make sure that we actually come to the level where we are transiting our political will to political action. And 2018 was actually a good celebration, a big game changer, for us, to start moving toward that direction that we actually want. And that's where actually the African Union joined hands with the CFTA Secretariat to start thinking about what needs to be done, urgently. And one of the programs that actually was put in front is that program I'll be just talking briefly about is the Common African Agro-Pact, the CAPS. The Common African Agro-Pact actually is a plan to establish a transboundary mega agro-industry with food reserve, food supply corridor, on the continent for all our producers to get way to share the product to the African market, actually. So these are the plan, and is actually being discussed at the moment, by all the lead institutions. And the plan is actually the perfect political plan, again, the political way to address this dilemma of countries that have all the resources, but have actually to be importing food and have to leave the people, going to die in the sea where they can be employed to produce the food. So in 2019, the Commissioner Sako was able to present the plan that was agreed by all the institutions to the minister. So all the African ministers were able to adopt that plan to be the plan that will lead the agriculture, that will change actually the narrative of African agriculture production, agricultural transformation on the continent. And here you can see the commodity that are actually targeted by the CAPS, the list is not exhaustive, but the plan that was approved by the ministry to make sure that Africa put a system in place to produce the quantum of those commodities that are taken from outside. So we are starting this process. Cocoa is part of the commodity and the wheat as well because of the latest development on the continent. So as you can see in that video that was playing before, the plan is to have 5 zones on the continent, 1 zone in each geographical area on the continent. So we'll be having a Northern African zone called Northern African Cap, Eastern African Cap, Southern Africa, and so on, and so on, and so on. And the commodity that every zone will be specialized in terms of developing will be based on actually the competitiveness. So we are actually doing some study, this is one of the drafts that came out with the PwC work. And the study actually is trying to scan which are the best commodity that African has to produce in each of the zones. So soon we will be getting some answer. But before we get there, actually, the leaders, when they met last time, they actually put emphasis on starting action, because the plan of getting the bigger zone will take long, but we need to start action that will help us actually to move faster, to showcase when we are moving. So there is a plan, to come up with what they call the CAPS demonstration project. It's not a pilot project, it's a real case project, but the CAPS, being the common African agro-power, has to belong at least two or more countries actually. So the plan that we are trying to do now is to target some few countries who can come together to develop the CAP demonstration project. It's something which will be about up to 1,000, even more hectares of agricultural industrial production zone, and we can have more area for industrial production where we are linking with all the smallholder farmers and so on. So the CAP demonstration project was discussed during the last meeting that's happened in Niamey, where all the leaders they came together to discuss good guidance. And I'm happy Minister Nzenza is here. He was part of the discussion. So this discussion actually was very helpful and provide clear guidance on how do we move actually, in terms of coming up with concrete action in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So there's a joint declaration that came, and one of the critical points that joint declaration was to come up with 10 demonstration projects on the continent as soon as possible. So the process has started, and Zambia, Zimbabwe was already together, and they have already proposed 1 project that we are trying to mobilize resources to start all the study, the feasibility study, and so on. And when we met during the AU summit in Addis, there was another plan that came on board. So this was the Zambia, Zimbabwe that's actually being discussed. But another plan that's coming on board is the Cocoa Cap. The Cocoa Park will be in Western Africa between Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. So the plan is to respond to the need of the 2 countries as expressed by President Nana this morning, come up with a good industry to produce the cocoa. So in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, they have one initiative that they call Cote d'Ivoire-Ghana Cocoa Initiative. And the SG was in Addis Ababa during the AU summit. So they were able to mobilize partners, to concretize this idea of coming up with the cocoa agro-industry in the continent. So we are working closely with them, and the president also is aware of the program. So they went to present the plan to the president. So they are working to make sure that we start the process as soon as possible. So after those 2 programs, we are actually going to identify more on the continent to conclude with the 10 agro CAP demonstration project. And to finish, actually, I saw if moderator is coming close to me. To finish, actually, when we met in Vienna last month, these are the experts working behind the COP. We came up with 4 major phases. And the first phases are those 2 CAP demonstrations that we are starting now. And we have more to come, We have by 14 months to come up with a plan to implement all those 10 CAP demonstration projects. And this will go with some mapping exercise that we have started. And African Development Bank has just come on board. So we are trying to find a way to map all the existing agro park on the continent in a way that we are able to position them, to find the trade corridor, for all of them, for us to be able to make sure that we are not leaving anyone behind, we are putting everyone together, to create a kind of a well-balanced agricultural corridor for the continent. So this is going to come up with other plans with strengthened institutions, to accompany all the plans that we are trying to implement. We are targeted to establish African Maize Trade Center that will be hosted by ACFTA. We are planning to establish African Rice Trade Center. So we really need to master anything that's happening on the continent when it comes to the trading and also the facilitating, the consumption and export of those commodities. And smallholder farmers have been at the center of the discussion. I'm just showing these two slides to show that they will not be left behind. We are developing a plan to strengthen them, to make sure that they are all part of the network that we are going to put in place. And we are targeting to have more jobs on the continent. This category of job, in terms of crop value chain. We also have more job in terms of animal value chain. I think I'll stop here. And today is the African Day, so I wish happy African Day to all of you. And I thank you for your attention. I've taken your time. Thank you very much.
One more time, ladies and gentlemen, help me appreciate Dr. Anselm Vadunhesi. Yours has been a thorough presentation on unlocking agricultural potentials in Africa. You've walked us through the demographic dividend, the problem of low production and high consumption, hence high imports, practical solutions that are being offered to stem the tide, examples of Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, and the rest. The ultimate problem of trade barriers, but most importantly, a promise of some political action and political will. With all this said, ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome my very esteemed panel for this session as we delve deeper into unlocking agricultural potentials in Africa. His Excellency Goodluck Jonathan, His Excellency Mohammed Monsef Masuki, Mr. Ali Gugu, and joining us virtually, Dr. Agnes Kalibata. A round of applause for my esteemed panel. Dr. Anselm Vadunhesi, respectfully, I'll invite you back. Your Excellency. Your Excellency, yours. Yes, yes, please. Your Excellency, yes. Your Excellency, please. Ours is a very interesting assignment in 45 minutes. And so in 45 minutes, ours will be to deliberate, and in 15 minutes, we'll revert to you, our very esteemed guests and audience, for you to engage us. What I want us to do, Your Excellencies, is for us to break this topic into two themes. The first theme is establish the linkage between markets and agricultural productivity. And then secondly, I want us to tackle climate change and its impact on agricultural potential. I hope it's pleasing to you. Is the theme okay? Are the themes okay for you?
Well, first of all, I would like to, I'm sorry, but I have to come back to the essential, because if we want to understand the situation in Africa, and mainly in North Africa, in my country, we have to come back to the essential. We have to, okay, it's sure that there are a lot of technical problems, but before the technical problems, we have to address the political problems. Look, at this very moment I'm talking to you, you have a lot of Tunisians queuing in front of bakeries because we are lacking bread. So their bread is becoming in Tunisia every day more and more expensive and more scarce. At the meantime, you have a lot of our young people, trying to cross the Mediterranean, and a lot of them would sink, would drown, and this is a pitiful situation. So before talking about, how to improve the exchange between African countries, etc., food security is the main problem everywhere. Where you don't have food security, you cannot talk about exchange, about market, about everything. Now, when I address the very reason of the situation now we're having in Tunisia, I find that there are three major factors that we have to have in mind every time we're talking about agriculture in Africa or everywhere. The first, political stability, political will, and the good policies. Okay. So political stability in Tunisia after the revolution, we have had about, I would say, 9 governments, which means that we have had 9 ministers of agriculture, which means that we have had 1 minister of agriculture every, let's say, 15 months. So how do you imagine the situation of this country? So political stability is the major problem everywhere, not only in Tunisia. And then the political will. The political will, which means that you decided that agriculture is key priority. This is what I have tried to do when I was in charge, but unfortunately the counter-revolution won in Tunisia, and then the counter-revolution now is in charge in Tunisia. And the problem of the priority of agriculture is no longer the most important thing. This is why Tunisians now are queuing in front of bakeries, you know, because they like bread. And then, well, I have seen that Africa is divided in 6 regions. You know that Northern Africa is the least integrated region in all Africa. Western Africa, is, Southern Africa, etc., is much more integrated than Northern Africa. Why? Because we don't have the political will of government. The government of Algeria, the government of Morocco, the government of Tunisia are all against each other. And then the third, I'm going to finish. And then the third factor, most important factor, is good policies. Of course, you can promote agriculture like you do in Morocco, but if you choose the worst policy, it means that oriented economy, oriented agriculture, you know, to the export and not to the consumption, or if you promote kind of agriculture which would take a lot.
Yeah, His Excellency Mohamed Munsef Masuki. And so I would take that as a footnote to the first panel. But for now, let's delve into the meat and potatoes of our discussion, unlocking agricultural potentials in Africa. Thank you for that overview. I want to begin with you, Your Excellency Goodluck Jonathan. I want to ask a very simple question. How can Africa's agricultural sector maximize opportunities from the growing regional and global market as it pertains right now?
Well, thank you, because I was even telling my officers who came with me that the panel in the morning discussed almost everything, because when President Obasanjo mentioned the issue of agribusiness instead, it's a summary of everything.
Exactly.
I'm quite pleased with what Mohammed said. Even in the morning, that matter came up. President Obasanjo talks about not political will, but political action. Then I remember, yes, added as political leadership. I think former Prime Minister, my good friend. See, I believe that for Africa to move beyond rhetorics, is that our leaders must have vision.
Okay.
If you have a vision to transform your country from one point to the other, based on the different sectors, you may not cover all the sectors. You have a target, then you will have the political will, you will have the political action, you will have the political leadership. This morning, I just Googled to find out which countries have the biggest farms in the world. The first is China. The second biggest is China. The rest 8, Australia. And these are the 2 leading countries in terms of agriculture. China population is about 1.45 billion. And of course, the Executive Secretary of the African Continental Trade Area mentioned it, that they moved 700,000 people out of poverty. I think the target of China, which is believed in the vision of the leadership then, is to use agriculture. First of all, is to feed the massive population they had. And I remember when I was in office and I visited China, there was a professor we had I discussed with, when they had that pressure of how will they get enough food for their population. Science, technology, and innovation came in. That professor developed a grain of rice that the yield was so massive, but somehow the grain is small. So they used it to feed the poor people, but they couldn't really export it. People preferred the longer rice grains. But that is where science, technology, and innovation come to play. Australia is a small country of 26.1 million people, just about 18% of the population of Nigeria. But they are leading in agriculture. That means that their vision was to export food, not just to feed their population. So what I'm saying is that until we, the leaders, when we aspire to be presidents of our own countries, have the real vision then you will go to where you want to go. In Nigeria, I remember when President Obasanjo was the president in 2003, I think this group gave him a medal. Somehow 10 years later, I was also praised because we revolutionized agri in Nigeria. But basically what we're talking about, the issue of market and the continental free trade area is critical. First and foremost, we must produce, and we must use technology to package it very well. And if we can't do that, you will see that with time, if we have liberal trade policies, people will smuggle commodities from outside Africa, bring into Africa, and move from one country to the other as if it were produced in Africa. And that is one area that we must be very, very watchful. And it will begin to create problems between some of the countries. Some countries may smuggle these things in and push it to other countries, and based on the liberal trade. So basically, the African Union is really encouraging the science, technology, and innovation. I think most countries are coming up. And I think that is an area we must look at. Just like everybody talks about the total value chain, in terms of the production, of course, in terms of packaging, so that we will no longer continue to deal in raw produce from the farm. Okay. I believe that if we look at this critically, okay, and of course, the issue of finance is there. In fact, President Obasanjo mentioned about finance. Before coming here, I had a conversation with somebody who is into helping farmers to facilitate their programs, clearing land, hiring equipment for them. So that, look, commercial banks in Nigeria no longer even lend to farmers because of inability to pay back. Even the CBN that normally have support these loans are now very weary because 90% or more than 90% people can't pay back. Because we emphasize too much in terms of rural farming. Okay. And that's one thing that we must. If you go to most countries, even in Nigeria, there's Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. We take agriculture as a way of rural development. The roads that service the farms are track roads for motorcycles and tricycles, not the one for big trucks, because the assumption is that it's for rural. And that cannot lead Africa anywhere. Sure. We must really industrialize farming. Farming must be taken as a business. And when we hang on that, I think it will surely improve.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. I can surmise from your presentation that you emphasize, please, a round of applause. You emphasize leaders having vision. You emphasize science, technology, and innovation playing a central part. You also talk about packaging and value addition, the role of innovative financing, and then the focus on commercial farming. Let me come back to you again, Your Excellency Mazuki. You have already stated that we need to understand the geopolitics and the unique constraints of each region. Could you please shed light also on other things we can do to maximize the potential and some of the things that can, limit optimization?
Well, you began by asking the role of the market, how the market can play a role in promoting the agriculture in Africa. This is a very, very important question because we have a good experience in Morocco.
Is the sound okay?
When you focus on the role of the market, as you know, to produce more and more goods, mainly to export to the foreign countries. What happened in Morocco? We have had this experience. We have that. In fact, you have promoted the big farmers, but the small farmers, they didn't enjoy at all this improvement. So the market would play an ambiguous role. It means that it would promote you have big farmers, but creating a middle-class farmer. This objective has not been attended in Morocco or in Tunisia or everywhere. So relying only on market for me, can be very, very dangerous, because you will have exactly the same phenomena in all the area of economy, which means that you will have the rich people would get more and more rich, and the poor would get more and more poor. And this is not good for the agriculture. It's not good also for the society as a whole.
That's brilliant. Let's go now to the heart of the matter, the AFCFTA, with its promise of delivering millions out of poverty, but most importantly, enhancing economic linkages and promoting industrialization. I want to come to you, Mr. Ali Gogo. You are a former permanent secretary at the Ministry of Trade and Industry, Tanzania. Let me ask you a very simple question. In your view, what distinguishes AfTA from previous or current regional trade promoting programs?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, Jerry. At the outset, allow me to express my sincere gratitude that I am humbled and feel honored to participate in this panel, surrounded by the eminent former presidents and heads of state. I also acknowledge the presence of my former president, who is also the patron of Uongozi Institutes, and distinguished participants in this forum. So, Mr. Moderator, I think my contribution to this panel is based on the fact that I participate, being privileged to play a role in the architecture of the AFCFTA itself as among the negotiators in the process. But I also worked as a deputy permanent secretary for investment in the ministry, but I also have now a background on working in the regional administration in Tanzania. So I think I have a contribution to play a role. But specifically to your question, I think the AFCFTA is quite different, because if you look at the spectrum of the trading agreements that we have in Africa, firstly, of course, we are mostly members of the World Trade Organization. Most of our countries are members of the WTO, where is a sort of a unified multilateral trading platform, which gave us a leverage of obtaining a much more open or liberalized markets, not only in the African markets, but also the markets that are beyond Africa. But I think within the purview of the WTO framework, we have flexibilities that have allowed us to integrate regionally and even bilaterally. I think it's from the WTO. So I think with the WTO, at least member states or countries had the leverage, had the flexibility, the latitude to negotiate based on their interest. And I think the word interest came about quite a lot in the previous session. Now with the regional blocks, which we have currently, Tanzania is a member of the East African Community and in SADC, at least the nature there is that we integrate on demand-driven sort of a process, whereas we have other avenues, the trading sort of frameworks, which are sort of unilateral. They are sort of imposed to us. The uniqueness about the AFCFTA, this is a homegrown process. It's a homegrown framework. We negotiated ourselves as Africans. We needed to do our own assessment, and we developed disciplines so far, or protocols, that actually are aimed at informing or addressing our unique, problems within our capitals. So I think that is firstly. But there are other contexts that I find the AFCFTA unique, is that the AFCFTA is based on a principle of acquis, that it takes account on whatever processes that Africa has already undergone. It takes account that we have regional configurations. So the CFTA actually is building, or has been built upon, what has already happened in Africa. As Tanzania being a member of the East African Community, we are already at a stage that we are a customs union, but also a common market. The other configurations are at a free trade area. But I think all of these disciplines have been sort of accounted for. They have been enshrined within the architecture of the agreement itself. Of course, we have disciplines as in trade and services. I think the AFCFTA took account on the levels at which the members have reached in terms of integrating themselves in these regional individual frameworks. So I think that is a major part that I find unique. But within the architecture of the agreement itself, you have disciplines that talks about infant industries. So the agreement take cognizance that we have to nurture our industrialization processes. We still have to take account that we have some sectors that are still nascent. So the agreement also has disciplines on safeguard measures, trade remedies, and other disciplines that actually are homegrown. So I think it is unique, it is different. As others have said, I find also it is a game changer. It is an agreement that is demand driven. It's African by all its accounts, yes. So those will be my initial insights in terms of how unique the AFCFTA is.
I'll come back to you shortly on challenges, but let me go to Dr. Anselm Vodunhese. You have been also an active player in this space. Let me ask you, what value does AFTA bring to agriculture in Africa? Yes. I said, what value does AFTA bring to agriculture in Africa or agribusiness?
Okay, you mean what value AFCFTA bring to agribusiness, right? Yes, sir. So when you look at the context of Africa, we'll emphasize a lot on increasing productivity. And people will do a lot, providing quality food, quality package, like what President was just saying. But if there is no market for them to bring their food, to sell their food, we may not go far. I give one example that I used to listen to, the example from one of the, let's say, bigger private sector on the continent, it's Dangote, saying, for example, he able to produce good, but taking the good to a country that's just close to him, he finds it difficult because of all the complications, when it comes to moving the good around, So what the CFTA can bring in solving this kind of problem is a lot that you cannot even value, There's a lot of work that's put on the shoulder of SG. Here I'm looking at it, actually. What's going to do for the continent is immense, actually. And if he's able to do that, we actually will liberate our continent. And the way you can feel that, just like taking any road, trying to cross two countries and see how long you spend, taking your goods to just cross the border. So there's a lot of expectation from us. And the discussion that is going on in terms of the Common African Agro-Pact, one of the focus is how do we come up with good instruments that will actually create enabling business environment and investment environment from someone who is, let's say, from Ghana, can go invest in Zambia without any complications. And those two are actually very important for us. We have a concrete case that's in front of us, the case of Zambia and Zimbabwe, which is one of the projects we are working on now. If this project is successful and we are able to get from CFTA a good tool, that will allow anyone to invest there. Like anyone here, whether it's for financial market, can go in there and spend his money, and look for its return actually. And to get there actually is a lot of way to go. And the discussion, most of the time, are not easy when you are bringing all the countries together. And there's a lot of work that actually the CFTA need to do, to convince people that it's for the benefit of everyone, it's coming together, to liberate this continent. Until this is done, actually, we'll be going around, for many years and will not get there, actually. Yeah.
I asked this very simple question, but what is apparent to all of us is that markets and agricultural productivity, really, there's very little correlation. What I see is the fact that we need to de-risk agriculture and make agribusiness more exciting. But then it comes to you, the powers that be, our political leaders. Let me come to you once again, Your Excellency, good luck, Jonathan. What are the mechanisms in place to de-risk agriculture and agribusiness?
Thank you. I think this matter was also interrogated a little in the morning, and when we were even having the lunch, it was one of the issues discussed. The key thing for agri to succeed in Africa The government must play a key role, no doubt about that. But private businessmen, too, must be ready to play a key role. You see, if you talk about agri-financing, it's easier for the bigger farms to get loan because they can guarantee the loan. But at a small scale level, they cannot guarantee because, and of course, most of the African countries, we have the rain-fed agriculture where we crop only once a year. A man takes a loan, plants grains, maybe maize or whatever, and within 3-4 months, harvest and make some money. It looks big at the beginning, but that is his earning for the year. So when you spread it according to across the 12 months of the year, you virtually have nothing to take care of the children, health, school, and so on. So at the end of the day, they find it extremely difficult to pay the loans back. So two things. If we encourage big businessmen, we sometimes find it difficult to invest in agriculture. I remember when I was in office, I really wanted, and just like President Obasanjo spoke with Dangote, I called Dangote one day and said, look, you're one of the most successful businessmen we have. Why not also invest in agriculture? Why will you be importing crude sugar from Brazil and refine in Lagos? Why can't you plant it? What he told me was that, look, it's easier to deal with chemicals than to deal with biological specimens because of the risks involved. So that is the problem. So if we can convince some of the big business people to also show interest in agriculture, because they can easily secure such loans. At the rural level, the small-scale farmers, of course, governments have been trying. The success rate has been very low. Some countries do better. But through the central bank or the reserve bank of the country, the reserve bank of the country can guarantee, like Obasanjo said, the experiment they did in Nigeria where the CBN guaranteed about up to 70%. So assuming the person was unable to pay, CBN can at least pay 70% of the money back to the commercial bank. And banks start giving. But so I think this is, that should be a combination. When private people, like I spoke about big farms, in Australia, in China, those big farms are not owned by governments. Probably government supported, I didn't read details, supported the farmers, just like President Obasanjo talks about the poultry farm that the person produces about 1 million eggs every day and spend about $40 million for every installation. And that half of it, that $20 million, was a grant by government or probably from an organization. If governments come up with that and identify serious-minded people, not politicians, and the money is given, then that can revolutionize agriculture in Africa. But from a little experience I have in Nigeria, sometimes even if government comes with such a robust policy, at the end of the day, the briefcase farmers are those who will access the money. And the real farmers may not even get that money because the grant is free. So I think government has a role to play. The private sector also has a role to play. The risk, because we must reduce the risk in borrowing. Otherwise, banks will go bankrupt. And banks are not, they have to make money, not charity organizations. So there must be some security for that. And it's only government that can at least give that security.
Your Excellency, you make a very interesting point, but let me come to your colleague, Your Excellency Mazuki. What's the role then of insurance?
What?
Insurance.
Yeah.
Yes, in de-risking agriculture and agribusiness.
Well, once again, you always talking about technical problems, and as a politician, I'm always talking about political problems. You know, this question you are asking for me has, I'm sorry to tell you, but it's, for me, look.
You know why I asked you this question?
No,
it's a lead up to my conversation with you on climate change, especially given where you're coming from.
Yes, I know, but the problem is that as a politician, I am really obsessed by the fact that if you want to unlock agriculture in Africa everywhere, you need, first, you need a political system, you need political will, political stability, and good policies. Look, I am not a pessimistic man. and I'm not optimistic also. I always define myself as a pissy optimistic person. So from this pissy optimistic person, from my pessimistic, optimistic, I do believe that Africa, is going forward, and that we have to look about questions like financing, like insurance, like technical, etc. This is very important. But please don't forget that half of our continents live under a stable regime. Look what's happening now in Sudan. Look what's happening in Tunisia. Look what's happening in Libya, etc., etc. So we have to tackle all those kind of questions, have all this question in mind, so we can talk about the real Africa and not the dreamed Africa. Of course, I dream of new Africa that, that has solved all the problem, financing problem, market problem, etc., etc. But the reality is not this. Today we are, once again, the moment I'm talking to you, Tunisian are queuing for bread. This is my main problem. So, yes, we have to tackle those kind of this optimistic problem. We have to think about. But once again, don't forget that, unfortunately, disorder in Africa is growing. Imagine that Sudan 2 years ago was a country. Now it's no longer a country. Libya also was a country. So please, let's have this in mind so we can talk about the real Africa.
He makes a point that our problems are basic, like economic, but the implementation of those solutions are technical, and most importantly, it all lies with the politician. Okay, we'll see how we'll navigate that. But let me come to you, Mr. Gugu. You have an interesting profile. You come across, with some investment background in addition to your knowledge in industry. Share with us, how can we make agribusiness attractive? I come to you from the viewpoint of innovative finance, insurance being one. What are some of the insurance arrangements in place? We have the Africa Trade Insurance Agency. How can institutions like that come on board to de-risk agribusiness and agriculture?
Jerry, thank you very much. So perhaps in responding to your question, I would refer to the conversation that the patron has actually alluded to in the earlier session, that during his tenure, he was able to establish the Tanzania Agricultural Development Bank as part of the measure to de-risk the agricultural sector. But what is going currently under the sixth phase government in Tanzania, under the leadership of Dr. Samia Suluhu Hassan, firstly is to allocate resources as a government. Okay. In the past 3 years, the government has actually tripled the budget for agricultural sector. It was actually around $150 by 2021, but today we are talking over 500 million US dollars. We are talking at around 500 million US dollars currently. So I think that in itself is a statement, is an indication of a commitment. I think it's beyond the goodwill. It's actually the government in action. Okay. But I think secondly, as regards to that, the government has embarked on a strategy to do block farming. Okay. And this would address and take advantage of the market opportunities that have happened across the globe based on the geopolitics. So we are pursuing the block farming to be able to be self-sufficient in commodities like wheat, but edible oil and other products that we feel that we can be able to produce within, to address the domestic demand, but also be able to supply to our colleagues in other African member states. But I think the other narrative that I want to bring across again, it was spoken about by His Excellency, former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, is with regard to the ongoing BBT, which is a Build Better Tomorrow program that actually takes account of the youth dividend that we have in Africa, but what we have in Tanzania, to actually support them, give them the necessary skill sets, but provide them with the portion of land freely. And they're given, all the necessary documentation for this land as part of the capital to influence them to engage in agriculture. Okay. But I think what the government is also doing is actually designating land, particularly for agriculture. So we have land that is under the government land bank but designated for agriculture. I think that is also a measure towards de-risking, because I think one of the elements that maybe the financial sector is a bit scared when it comes to investing in agriculture is that you have land that perhaps is community owned by the communities. You then have all the necessary documentation, but through this process, we are able to actually provide legally parcels of land under the land bank, which we can promote for investors from within, but from the outside the continent. So as I want to conclude my response to your question, the moderator, I think the idea in terms of the question that you asked previously, the AFCFTA architecture has already addressed, at least in the document, that agriculture is a key priority. I think the agreement talks about the issue about competitiveness, about improving our seed production in the continent, the issues around research and development in agriculture, but I think there are a lot to do about the infrastructure, particularly the marketing infrastructure. So the investment, the de-risking would be actually to ascertain the necessary avenues where the private sector would come in to invest in these areas that have already been addressed under the architecture of the agreement itself. So thank you.
Your Excellency Mazuki, together with Your Excellency Goodluck Jonathan, you two come across as men of science, and shortly I'll come to you on a scientific issue, climate change. But we're joined also by Professor Jean Mahinda, representing Dr. Agnes Kilabata, who is the President of Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa. Can we raise him on the line? Prof, can you hear us? Hello, Prof. Could you unmute your mic, please? Hello, Prof. Could you please unmute your mic?
We can barely hear you.
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you for joining us. Can you hear me?
We can't hear you properly.
Okay.
Jerry.
All right. So we want to begin a conversation with you. Let's start with climate change. I want to ask a very simple question. What challenges and opportunities do climate change introduce to agricultural production and productivity in Africa?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Jerry. I think the challenge is climate change include actually reversing and in many cases actually eroding the wins and the gains of households and communities and even nations. But there are also opportunities that include, that brings a wake-up call for the continent to strengthen resilience and adaptation among others. I think in terms of challenges, I could quickly highlight, number one, the unpredictability of the supply, which is a major one. With the increasing population and demand for food, unpredictability of supply could easily descend into social and even political chaoses, and this is being seen already in many parts of our continent. Number two, I think the cross-boundary nature of the climate shocks means that its impact can have far-reaching consequences, which demand, therefore, a multi-country solutions. With increasing climate risks currently in terms of temperature and heat stresses, a crop which we currently rely on, like maize, wheat, we may not be able to produce it in the near future, therefore calling for a diversified farming system. Next one would be on the new pests and diseases for crops and livestock, which have been seeing recurrent now, which are becoming more or less a norm. And unprepared in terms of how to respond, through the right treatment and practices means that agricultural productivity gains could actually easily be wiped out and faster. And lastly, there's a need definitely for forward-looking and predictive capabilities for climate resilience. Being able literally to forward the impact of climate change, be it positive and negative, and how it will allow actual decision-making backed with data and evidence to plan ahead, but also shift businesses, redirect investment, and ultimately install mitigation measures. And just to close on this question, crop and animal diversification is going to be key in the future of our continent. With the changing climate, actors are more willing to test and invest in new crop types and varieties, as well as animal enterprises that prove to be more resilient in the face of the climate change. I'll stop here for the time being. Jerry,
Okay.
back to you.
All right. But let me just push you a little further, Prof. As it stands right now, Africa, do we have adaptation and mitigation capacities to take advantage of the opportunities arising from climate change?
Yeah, thank you for that follow-up question. I think Africa remains committed as a continent to being a part of the solution, despite the fact that, number one, Africa is one of the least, emitter at 4% of greenhouse gas emission, responsible for global warming and climate change. Number two, despite the fact that Africa is the worst hit by adverse impact of climate change and climate variabilities, and we are seeing it live here in East Africa. Number three, despite the fact that Africa has the least capacity to cope with, and due to limited response and buffer capacity of communities. However, the continent has actually climate change adaptive traditional crops which could actually survive under stress environment, including even some traditional crops like sorghum, millet, cassava, and legumes that are being grown across different agroecological zones in the continent. So overall, I just want to say that Africa is trying to build resilience and adaptation. And this is a priority, even in the African Common Position paper that was presented during the 2021 Food Systems Summit. So therefore, the continent would like to benefit from the various funding, including the Global Climate Funds, the Adaptation Funds, the Loss and Damage Funds, and would actually appreciate this funding being made accessible. And I believe these are the conversations that are going to be taken forward through One Voice as a continent towards the next COP28 meeting. Back to you, Jerry.
All right. Thank you, Prof. I will be with you shortly. But let me come to you, Dr. Anselm Foduhesi. From the submission of Prof, that we have already crops that can withstand these climate, issues. Tell me, what then can we do to improve upon our food security as a way of enhancing our potentials agriculturally?
So I get you are talking about improving the food security in the context of the climate change, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. When you go to the ground, most of the time, what you are seeing on the paper or people are talking is also quite different. You go to see in the community, for example. The climate change. What the climate change is bringing is more about the distortion on the, let's say, the rain cycle and also the drought cycle. Someone who is affected maybe have a kind of long, like a longer drought period, and people who are not prepared for that, you can see how much they are affected because actually the frequency of rain that they are used to are being disturbed, So when they face the situation where they have longer drop session, because all of them actually let's say, the rain-fed agriculture actually. So they only rely on rain. They don't have any irrigation system. So when this kind of season in terms of longer drop or shorter rain, that actually is more, let's say, unpredictable for them. It affects a lot of the culture. You can see the whole community like staying for the whole year without achieving any concrete, input and output when it comes to agricultural output. So that's how much they have been affected. But when it comes to talking about the resilience, actually, we fail sometimes telling the truth. Actually. The resilience of those farmers actually is more about getting them most of the climate smart technology that they can use, to easily face those, and this is not happening yet. Our state need to invest, to listen to those farmers, accompanying them, in a way, that they can actually face those climate change. We have so many opportunities when it comes to, let's say, that we can rely on when it comes to support those farmers. But those opportunities, because of climate, rainfall, and so on, it's difficult for us to access to them, for example. It's difficult for Africans to access those, and our member states need to have develop, let's say, the more appropriate model that will help them actually to assist our farmers. You go to any country, you see like most of the farmers, like 80% of the farmers actually are actually like rain-fed reliable farmers. So how do they deal with when they are facing this kind of climate situation? So the challenge actually is very high, and the attention needs to be put in coming up with appropriate climate smart technology, to assist those farmers. And as far as, yes, we have been doing a lot, but when it comes to the potential that we have, we reach all the African farmers is a bit limited, and that's where we need to work with our member states to make sure that we get a solution. So solution may be very simple actually. Getting a cooling system for farmers, for example, to reduce the post-harvest loss, very simple solution. But we need to bring that to the attention of people who can invest and find a kind of financing model that will help those farmers, to access those technology. You go to them now, they may not have the money in cash to give you. But when you put a kind of financial and business model that will help them to get the technology and pay you like in a larger term, they can afford and they can be more resilient. So when you talk about resilience, it's more about being practical on the ground, find the right solution in terms of technology, in terms of business solution, in terms of advisory solution for those people that to leave that situation that actually is affecting them most. Thank you.
It's interesting you talk about, these solutions, and we're fortunate to have two former heads of state who are men of science. I want to ask you both, what kind of technology do you think is necessary in Africa to unlock our agricultural, potential? Should it be genetically modified technology, or we should still go organic? And if we still go organic, how can we reap the gains?
Well, just a few words about climate change. We Africans, we can do nothing to stop it. I think because it depends of 4 regions, China, India, Western Europe, and United States of America. But we can ask them to repay us because of the damage they have done to us. Second idea is that we have to adapt. Stop the phenomenon, but to adapt it. How to adapt? The right crop at the right with the right people. This is the only way to tackle the problem. Otherwise, we will be lost. Why I'm saying this? Because I know that in some area in Morocco, for instance, or even in Tunisia, we have used a lot of water-depleted crops, and this have deepened the crisis of water. This was extremely bad for the people. If it was good for the market, once again, I say, it's very, very dangerous, to rely on market. We have to rely on ourselves, of course, but once again, the right people are, because the community is not, I'm involved, I think, enough involved in the process. Well, this is all what I want to say.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Let me just add a little to that. The issue of climate change, the question is advantages and disadvantages. Yeah. We know the disadvantages. Okay. The climate change causes change in rainfall regime and the volume of rainfall, leading to flooding. The other extreme created droughts in some parts of the world. These are both extremes. In fact, if it is only rainfall, you can manage. But when you have massive flooding, sometimes it wipes out all the crops planted. So the only thing we can say theoretically for now is that we should be able to develop grains or seedlings for plants that can mature in shorter duration. Maybe some of the plants that we plant that stays 6 months to 9 months, if we can get the ones shorter, maybe 3 months, 4 months, and exploit the period based on the local climate of the area. But the key thing is that both the people in the research sector and the traditional will begin to find ways to preserve. So if you're able to crop early, you should be able to preserve whatever you crop that will last for the rest of the year. We should be able to go into studies, innovations that can give us that. Probably that is the little advantage, just like they say, necessity, the mother of invention. But other than that, just like His Excellency said, the disadvantages are so obvious. In terms of genetically modified crops, of course, and organic, it's very, very controversial. It's difficult for somebody to make. I don't want to make a statement that people will take me to the left or to the right. I think this debate is still on. It is still evolving. I think scientists are still looking at whether the genetically modified varieties will have health effects on humans. If it will have health effects, definitely people will not love it. But I think the research is still going on. And I think we need people who are really doing the research there to make comment. I wouldn't want to make any significant comment there.
All right. Mr. Ali Gugu, I'll come to you shortly on a different question. But let me go to Prof. Prof on the line. Prof. Prof. Jean Mahina, let me come to you with that same question. 50% of the world's arable land right here in Africa, should we still go organic, or there should be a healthy blend of genetically modified and organic, or strictly organic? Which one? Could you please unmute? Prof, can you hear me? We can hardly hear you. Okay.
Jerry, can you confirm you can hear us now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah, we're having network issues. So I think to your question quickly, when it comes to deploying, agricultural technologies to smallholder farmers, we need to understand that it has to be context specific. We have a variety of agroecological zones across the continent and a variety of farming systems and obviously a variety of crop commodities. There are value chains where biotechnology has actually allowed the continent to make progress, including the genetically modified technologies that you just mentioned. But there are other value chains that have still potential to grow and provide more output, even within the existing varieties and technologies that are available from the national research, but also the international research system. Okay. So it has to be context specific. We cannot deploy one size fits all. Let's look at the range of varieties and the crops that have big potential for responding to biotechnology systems, and those that still have a productivity margin using the existing technologies and knowledge. What is most important currently for our smallholders farmers in Africa is to have the right policies in place combined with the right access to the right technologies, the right input, more importantly, the right knowledge and the right services from the private sector across the whole range of value chain.
All right.
Over to you, Jerry.
I'll take that as a political response and not an academic one. In 5 minutes, we shall bring this panel to a close, revert to you, the audience, and then we shall close. But let me come to you, my good friend, Mr. Ali Gugu. Let's talk about what His Excellency Olusegun Obasanjo talked about, division of labor and specialization. He put it more concretely, regional division of labor and specialization. You come from a trade and investment background. How will we ensure the success of such a scheme if we decide that, look, Ghana is such that every part of the country, when you plant maize, it grows. So Ghana should be a maize, producing hub in West Africa. How can Nigeria also maybe develop yam? And what are some of the trade arrangements that are in place to complement these arrangements?
Thank you for that question. And I think I want to refer to what technically would be called the regional and global value chains. And I think from a technical point of view, as regards to the implementation of the AFCFTA, you would still have, as in any free trade arrangement, you would have, fears from some of the members of the fact that perhaps there could be losers and winners in the process of liberalization. But I think for some of us who are coming, for example, from the East African community, I think this has proven quite different in the fact that previously or initially there were countries like us that were a bit fearful in terms of the implication of opening up our markets. But I think down the years the story is a bit different. Every partner state in the East African community is arguably getting a fair share of the liberalization process. And I think the story wouldn't be anyhow different when it comes to the African continental free trade area. So when you are saying, or when you are talking of division of labor in a particular value chain, some countries would ask, where would I be seated in a particular value chain? So if you're talking about producing maize or some of these other commodities that have been alluded to by the doctor during his presentation, that you could have potential, for example, in Tanzania to produce maize. So the other partner states would say they would concentrate on other commodities that they have comparative and competitive advantage. But it will be like, an assessment will have to be made to ensure that where I'm seated, I'm not on the losing side. But I think in any account, you'd be able to produce what you have all the necessary requisite on a particular product. For example, from a region where I'm now serving, in Dodoma, you have a huge potential of producing grapes, something that you don't find in any other region in Tanzania. So I can't be seated in Mwanza and claim to invest in grape where Dodoma, would be able to farm grape even in dry season. So I think this should apply across our countries to appreciate the fact that there could be certain value chains that others could be doing better than others, and I think that should be a way to go to specialize on particular areas where you have all the necessary requisites in terms of comparative and competitive advantage. I think that is the area that I would be. So for example, if you're talking about, say now we have cotton, that beyond textile, you can also, produce edible oil out of cotton. So why the countries in Africa that are, more abundantly blessed with producing cotton, concentrate on cotton, and some of us, concentrate on producing other products that we can compete. And I think that will then allow us then to trade where, you have the best competences in a particular product. So I think I'm compliant to that. I think that should be the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, I thought you wanted to say something? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for my esteemed panel. Wow. This has just been exactly 45 minutes. So we want to engage you, our distinguished audience. You might want to raise your hand, identify yourself, shoot straight with your question, your suggestion, your comment, and we'll be glad to take them and then revert. We have mics available. Please raise your hand if you desire to speak. Yes, I see a hand here. Please. You can direct your question to any of my panelists. Okay, no problem. There's a mic coming through.
It's a suggestion. perhaps a value chain mapping of the region will help us understand who's got what and who can trade with who. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much. We shall take two more. There's a hand there. Okay.
Apologies for that hiccup. My name is Josephine Okot. I am from Victoria Seeds Limited in Uganda and Rwanda. So my question is first to the FARA Secretary General. When you did the mapping, I got concerned that you didn't mention any center of excellence for mechanization. As you heard earlier, I think from President Obasanjo, we really need to eradicate the hand hoe, because without completely abolishing it, I don't think we shall make any progress. So I would be happy to see that center of mechanization. Another concern was climate change that was highlighted so much. As you are aware, it's not just drought and flooding.
Yeah.
It brings invasive pests. If I give you the example of East Africa, we suffered with the locust that was specific in Uganda, and then after that, we had the African armyworm. You know, a few years later, the whole continent had to grapple with the fall armyworm. So there has to be investment also in managing pest and disease. I think IITA is doing very well in the context of having that Center for Entomology in Cotonou. But without investment and research and development, I don't think you'll succeed. And the third point is, we know we have only 2 CG centers in Africa, IITA and Africa Rice. But believe you me, those centers are funded by donors. African governments need to invest in research and development. As we contend with climate change, I'm aware we have indigenous vegetable species, for example, and crops. I'll give you the example of the Bambara nuts, but they have gone off the radar. So those are the crops that have to come to the fore, but IITA or Africa Rice cannot finance such research if the money is coming from elsewhere. So I think it's a major, major priority. I would pray this forum takes. Finally, as a businesswoman, I cannot live without mentioning financing. It has been talked to so much, but we need to collect the facts. There are domestic banks, then there are continental banks, then there are foreign banks in the space where I work. But the biggest challenge we see is that it seems the central banks are totally disconnected from all the policies that go on in the continent. Even when I go to most forums, I don't find the central banks. In the context of where I operate, they do not relate the climate change we are talking about to how they regulate the commercial banks. The payback period is still the same, the 6 months, the 9 months, the 1 year. They are really short, and you know if there's a crop failure, that period is too short. So the central banks need to be engaged, and the cost of financing, we have to ensure that we are competitive. Borrowing at 20%, the highest rate of finance on any continent. No matter how much you want us to integrate, we will not. Because in my space, you find companies from Europe and China. They are seed companies like me. They compete with me. They are borrowing at under 2%, and I go to a domestic bank, whether in Kigali or Kampala, and I'm borrowing at close to 20%. So even in the ACFT, I'm sorry I'm talking law, the fact is they will outcompete us, and you are preparing the level playing field for the foreign companies, not me as an African national. So I'm very concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, a round of applause for her. Lovely. So in Uganda, it's 20%. I think we should swap. You should come to Ghana and I should go to Uganda. Don't tell my president I said that. And so now we have these amazing views which have come forth. My esteemed panel, you want to have a take at the various questions and comments that have come through?
Okay.
Let's start with you, Doc.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I think most of the comments are very positive and go in line with our thinking. Yes, when I was describing the effect of climate, I was actually giving an example of what we actually seen in West Africa. Yes, I know there is a lot that's happened actually in Eastern Africa in terms of locusts and other warming, and we are aware of that, and it's actually part of the research component that we are developing, in support of the African Union, because African Union have made a lot of communication on those low scores, what was happening in Eastern Africa region, for long, and there was a program that we actually were discussing, and that program will be implemented with all the research institutions. We have Asarika, which is actually one of the branch of FARA in Eastern Africa. We have Kadisa in Southern Africa, Korap in West Africa. We are all working together. And as part of our climate smart agricultural development discussion, these are the things that we are putting in place to make sure that we have a good plan for all the countries that will help them to address all the climate-related issues on the continent. There's a lot of that was said on the financing and research in Africa, and this is actually one of the weaknesses of our continent. You see, we have so many ambitions when it comes to looking for the right solution for our farmers, right solution for our government, to assist the farmers. But most of the time, we cannot go far because of lack of funding, actually. And we have put ourselves in a situation where we have to be all the time dependent to the donor from outside, like write 10, let's say, 100-page proposal to get money, like 1 million for one partner in Europe, EU, all those partners outside. But this is not helping us because when those partners they came in, they come with their own, kind of agenda that guides, your work. And this actually put us in a kind of difficult situation. And this might be a time to appreciate the intervention from our colleague here, for our members say to take research issue very seriously on the continent. We cannot go far if we don't invest in research. All those countries that are very far in terms of development, they are putting money in research. In Africa, it's not happening, actually. So I'd just like to thank you for that point that you made, and it's something that we can serve as part of the communique of this discussion. Issue of connecting the bank to fund the research, the fund let's say the farming on the continent. There is actually a lot of time a disconnect between farming accessing the money from the bank because of all the risks that have been associated to that, and have been discussed here. And there was an example from Tanzania where we had this farmer bank, and these are actually ideas that most of our countries are proposing, but most of them they don't go far because of the risks associated, with all the farmers. So what needs to happen is our government, to find a way, to get a kind of risk management instrument, where they can put some money to assist all the banks to be able, to the risks, the funding for agriculture sector. It's something that we have been discussing in many platforms, but it has to take up one day. You go to Europe, you go to all those, India, they put a lot of money in supporting, in subsidizing the agriculture. But in Africa, it's not happening like that. That's where we are lagging behind. So these are actually great points, and I thank you for those contributions.
Lovely. Mr. Ligugu, would you like to respond to the value chains, the regional value chains by this?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, I think I would actually agree to the fact that perhaps the Secretariat will take up the fact that the proposal is to do a value chain mapping. And my contribution to that, I think it is critical, particularly on areas where we have homogeneity, where we are producing similar or like products. Definitely, you would want to, focus more on doing an assessment in terms of realizing who would be able to do it or produce better of a particular product than the other. Of course, I would like to cite an example. During one of our visits to Burundi, Her Excellency Dr. Samia met one of the fertilizer producer. The company is called Itracom. They were producing fertilizer in Burundi. But when discussing, and in terms of what is their market and where do they source the raw materials, it looked at their expansion sort of proposition would be more fitting if they produce or locate their factory in Tanzania, because they are using organic fertilizer. We are ordinarily the second largest livestock keeper in Africa, so they could source out manure more reliably in Tanzania. They are mixing the manure with phosphorus to produce organic fertilizer. So, given the proposal, Intracom accepted this offer, and they are now in Tanzania. They are expected to start, commercially producing fertilizer by July. They would start at around 200,000 tons of organic fertilizer by July. By end of the year, there will be around 500,000, but their target is to reach 1.5 million tons of organic fertilizer. So this is a demonstration, first, of the free movement of capital within Africa, but I think it's a division of labor that this company was able to relocate from Burundi to Tanzania in order to enjoy economies of scale from raw materials, but the market within. But I believe some of their fertilizer will be sold out to the rest of African countries. Super. Thank you.
Super. Professor Jean Mahinda. Prof, you want to have a take?
Do you kindly repeat the question? You can't hear participants from the audience at all.
We didn't hear you.
Hello, Jerry.
Yes, Prof, I can hear you
me?
now. Yes, I can hear you.
Can you kindly repeat the question? We couldn't hear participants from the audience at all.
Oh, some contributions were made from the floor on innovative financing, on also creating regional value chain mapping.
Yeah, so I think even though we didn't get the question right, but I comment probably from the highlights we just given here. And I think this is an area that was very well addressed by Mr. Gugu from the previous conversation in terms of innovative financing, including even access to insurance products and others. And I'm glad again in the audience you have His Excellency President Kikwete, who have really championed access to finance, including even establishing agricultural focused banks, which again Mr. Gugu mentioned about. But that does not stop the problems in terms of access to finance for smallholders and even the value chain actors broadly. And the conversation currently is on how can we promote and scale, blended financial product that have actually proven to be working at small scale. And again, Tanzania and Kenya, where we sit in East Africa, those models exist. And the question is, how can we put the right policy framework, the right institutional framework, bringing all the actors, including the financial institutions together, to make sure that value chain actors, starting with the farmers, can get the right product that speak to their right problem and that speak also to the farming system. So I think that's probably what we picked from the audience. Back to you, Jerry.
Okay, so Prof, let me just, put you on the spot for your last words. We've done some very good discussions on this topic, unlocking agricultural, potential in Africa. We've talked through the lenses of linkages between markets and agricultural productivity, climate change and its impact on agricultural potential. What are your last words? What should we really focus on as we intend to achieve this objective?
That's still to me, Jerry?
Yes. In a nutshell,
yes.
What would be your closing thoughts?
Sure. So I think I got your question, despite the network issue. I think for the time being, as a continent, really, we should start thinking and focusing on areas that have a high production potential and actually start producing what we eat. And I pick it again from the previous conversation where some speakers mentioned about the fact that today African agricultural production is actually performing below potential, and more effort is actually being put into value chains, that we don't even eat sufficiently. So investment in what we consume is limited, and however, as I mentioned earlier on, crop choices should not be limited by food habits, and diversifying and expanding high productive and risk averse crops, like root crops that we all consume across the continent, and other perennial crops into the food systems would be very critical moving forward. I think the second point probably to mention here is the fact that as a continent, we need to hasten the local market. Sabulo was talking earlier on the FCTA that has created the framework actually under which all countries in the continent, form into one seamless market of over, again, 1.3 billion people, like earlier mentioned. But for us to hasten actually the market currently, certain conditions must be met, including lowering and even eventually eliminating tariffs and non-tariff barriers so that trade can happen regionally, domestically, and also, continentally. Two last points to that question. Number one is on the commitment through formulation and implementation of the right policies and the regulations, as I mentioned earlier on, so that we can enable actually smooth flow of agricultural product between countries, but also between the regions. And lastly, I think we haven't emphasized more in terms of investment in water infrastructure that can help the continent actually tap into existing food basket at the continent, and therefore helping the continent meet, the food production, the food requirement. And this actually entails, investment in irrigation infrastructure, but also in farm level, rainwater management systems. So I'll give it back to you, Jerry.
Thank you very much, Prof. Jean Mahinda. Let me come back to you, Dr. Anselm Fudunhesi. Your closing thoughts?
Okay, yes, okay. Just few words in terms of our potential again. I have shown some figure in terms of how potential is Africa, but the weakness that we have been showing is the fact that we are not actually using all the resources that you have adequately. Just at lowest level, at the farmers level. You see, most of our farmers, they can do their best job, produce. But if they don't have road, even any simple road to transport the product, it will affect them, it will affect the country. Right? And that's the reason why we are importing. And you see, like, the figure that is given, what you call the post-harvest loss, the figure that is given for the post-harvest loss at the moment is between 50 to 65%, meaning that you produce 100 tons of something and you lose 65 tons, on the way, because you don't have any way to store it when, after you produce, you don't have any road to transport the material. So when it comes to our potential, we have a lot that we just need to find a way to unlock, by just committing to action, not only to commitment. And a lot of declarations have been taken in terms of measures today, but we just need to mobilize our stakeholders to implement those commitments and make sure that we are coming up with concrete action. Let's forget about looking for money from outside. We have money on the continent. If you find a good governance system that will allow the private sector to put the money to develop agriculture, it will happen in just a second, actually. So let's focus on what we have. Let's just put ourselves in a situation where there is no road, no airline to go to any other continent, and we are only alone here. We will find a way to produce.
Of course.
And that's what's missing, actually. We don't want to commit to unlock the potential, all the resources that you have. And that's what we need to start doing. Because the COVID has shown us how weak we'll be, when this kind of disaster come. And we never know what will going to come tomorrow. So we just need to start thinking about ourselves, finding a way to unlock our resource, and developing our agriculture, developing our country. It will happen in a second, actually.
Super.
Yeah.
Mr. Ali Gugu.
So, Jerry, my key takeaways at this point would be it's about unlocking the potential in the agricultural sector in Africa. So I think our leaders have done a great job by allowing us to have this noble agreement at the CFTA. Initially, I said it already, that the agreement has all the necessary provisions, the protocols that allows for, unlocking the potential. So I think that is the first stage. The second part is what has been discussed greatly during these two sessions. It's about political leadership. It's about the goodwill and action. And I think at that level, what needs more to be done is about how do we mainstream the AFCFTA itself. I understand the Secretariat is doing a lot to influence state parties to ensure that we have national implementation action plans to ensure that these disciplines, particularly on agriculture, are being delivered as planned. But I think we have to invest more on R&D, and in particular in developing the relevant seeds for our products. I think the time is now. There could be areas or commodities that we could produce and, sufficiently serve the export or the forex that we're using to import commodities like edible oil, wheat and others. For Tanzania, I think by 2025, we are sure that we'll be self-sufficient in producing sugar from within. And either, as I've said, through the other strategies, we want to ensure that we are also becoming self-sufficient when it comes to edible oil. And I think this could be done across Africa as regards to investing more in fertilizer and palm, to just mention a few. But I think there's an element. If we are able to produce these commodities within, I think from a leadership point of view, there is a lot that needs to be done to ensure that Africans are able to use what is produced within. We have that challenge that even for those products that we still produce within, we have some of our citizens that would opt to buy, foreign produced products against what is produced within. Strategies, for example, we have enacted a strategy in Tanzania where we are saying one district, one product, to ensure that at least every district concentrate on producing a particular product, and then you promote, the communities around that area to use that. But it's still a challenge that I think it's something that we can continue pursue. But I think advocating the AFCFTA in agriculture is something that we can all continue to do as a continent. Thank you.
Talking of those with foreign tastes, it just reminds me of those who wear suits on AU Day, but don't worry. Your Excellency, good luck, Jonathan.
Thank you so much. My take-home is just three points. First, just like President Obasanjo said in the morning, we must take agri as a business.
Yeah.
In fact, when I was in office, that was our slogan. We must take agri as a business and encourage young graduates to go into agriculture. And with their self-knowledge and experience, and of course they read widely, they will be able to improve on what they are doing. Secondly, the issue of science, technology, and innovation must be taken very seriously. The lady just talked about Uganda and Rwanda. It talks about the problem of locusts that followed the flooding. Of course, locusts are insects. It's not a virus like Ebola and
SARS.
Then also talks about the armyworm. The armyworm are basically the larvae of butterflies and moths. They're also insects. So these are things that it will not take too much. It's not a rocket science, finding a way to deal with them if we are serious and we bring science, technology, and innovation into it. And the issue of fears that if we talked about asking countries or zones to produce different crops and so on, I think that should also not give us so much fear. Because Africa is not closing their trade borders with the world. Countries will still trade with other parts of Africa. But the African Continental Free Trade Area, if we do that, it will encourage local production. And of course, it will create a little bit of competition, which will enhance our products and increase the packaging and other things. So I think we will gain more, and I don't see how anybody or any country will lose. West Africa will have something similar, the ECOWAS free trade area. So I think it is good for Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency Mazuki.
I heard a word, a concept that frightened me. Green revolution. For the people of my generation, probably we have heard this word in the 70s. During the 70s, India used this word, and you know how it ended up. In Iran also, this word has been used, and it ended up in a catastrophe. So please, never use this word again. Look for something else. This is the first thing. Second, I would like to, once again, to say that we have to tackle this problem from the two directions, from the macroscopic point of view and the macroscopic point of view. Macroscopic point of view, it's the political. We badly need political stability, political will, and political integration. Otherwise, even if you tackle the problem from the microscopic way, insurance, adaptation, everything, you will solve no problem. So we have to tackle the problem from the 2 points, from the two directions, and then we can surely be able to tackle the problem. The second, the first, I think the most important challenge we are going to face is not climate change, because we can adapt to climate change. I'm really fear, because I am involved in this political battle that Africa, and the whole world is going, to have the very turbulent area. We are going to face a lot of disturbance, a lot of wars everywhere, and the war between Russia and Ukraine has a lot of impact on our economy and our country. If Tunisians are now queuing for bread, because one of the reasons is probably the war in Ukraine. So we have to adapt to political change, to a climate change, to a lot of things. This is why we have to be very ready, to take all the challenge, because it's a matter of survival for all of us. But once again, I'm quite sure that we have adapted for thousands of years, and we are going also to survive for the next 5,000 years. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a call to innovate, to adapt, but most importantly, to look within ourselves as we unlock Africa's agricultural potentials. Help me say a big thank you to Professor Jean-Jacques Mahindra. He's the senior member, Accra, representing our resource person, the president of the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, Dr. Agnes Kalibata. Help me say a big thank you to Dr. Anselm Vodunhesi. He's the program coordinator, the Forum for Agricultural Research in Africa. Allow me to say a big thank you to the former permanent secretary, Ministry of Trade and Industry of Tanzania. And ladies and gentlemen, it's not complete without our two excellencies, His Excellency Goodluck Jonathan, former president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and His Excellency Mohamed Mansef Mazuki, former president of the Republic of Tunisia. Gentlemen, it's been a labor of love doing this with you. I hope we get to sit again, and when we sit, we'll be counting the dividends that have accrued to Africa's agricultural potentials from this discussion. Thank you very much. A group photograph, and then we break off for coffee and tea. We shall reconvene in exactly 5 minutes for the last plenary. Photographers, are you ready? Your Excellency, a group photograph, please. Finished. It's a sad photograph. It's all hardware, no software. But please, a round of applause for the panel. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have 5 minutes to just catch our breath, have some coffee, some tea, and reconvene for the last plenary. Bon appetit. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, respectfully, I ask that we all make our way back. First presentation that precedes the panel discussion on the markets as a driver of fostering agricultural productivity in Africa. The presenter is ready, the Senior Partner CEO, Southwest Investments, Dr. Fanny Gautier. Happily, let's make welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Fanny Gautier. A round of applause for her.
That for this transformation to take place, we need inspired leadership. So I have a proverb from Swahili that I wanted to start with, which says, I'll say it in English because I think the Swahili speakers in the room are not that numerous. So it says, he who listens to an elder's advice does not come to grief. And I think this is important to start our session this evening, because we've heard a lot of advice from the state and other leaders, and I think this program situates very well where we are now. So my remarks are going to be on the market as a productive culture for agricultural productivity. Because we've heard a lot on the panel that just ended, my comments will be a little bit different. So I first wanted to talk about the dependence that our African economies have on agriculture. So and that puts the agricultural sector in a very particular place in terms of the role that it can play after integration, particularly when we talk about regional integration. Now, why is that? First, because the earliest markets have been food markets. And of all the markets we can take a look at in Africa, those that still work quite well are the local food markets. So the question is, how can we take that success from the local food markets and scale it up so that it can offer solutions for regional integration and also offer solutions for how we can work more effectively in the agricultural market sector? So what defines then a best functioning market? If we look today at the food and nutrition value chain as an example, and I was very interested to hear Dr. Anselem's remarks on that, including the work around the value chains. There are at least three key areas I wanted to highlight. I'll talk about basic foods. Basic foods are very important now, particularly since we are facing what we are calling a polycrisis world, right? We have very high inflation, and the first impact of inflation is on food prices. So the average family during high inflationary times basically has to shrink to the very basic foods, and any government that wants to stay in power has to maintain those prices for basic goods. Otherwise, as you may have seen in Yaoundé a few years ago, what happened in Tunisia a few years ago, there's always a crisis around food prices. So basic foods are very important in a high inflationary environment. But there are other risks as well. For example, during the pandemic, and even now with the Ukraine war, we had a huge glutting in the supply chains. And that impacts the prices of food as well. So if we can improve regional integration, particularly around supply chain logistics, that can help keep the prices of basic foods lower. And then, of course, there are other areas which I will come to later. The second category on a functioning market in the agricultural sector is what I will refer to as superfoods. In today's world, when you look around the demands in the most advanced economies, they're actually demanding products that we in Africa used to eat as basic foods, but they've become now very costly because they've been classified as superfoods. Examples: ginger, baobab, even grains like teff, which is a basic grain for Ethiopia. Or you take cassava, because a lot of people are gluten intolerant. Cassava is now, or cassava flour is seen as an important ingredient for manufacturing and processing of food. So what used to be a basic product in Africa now, because it's in high demand in the rest of the world as a superfood, is causing those markets to advance, but then putting pressure on the prices locally. So these are some of the products we have to look at in terms of local versus global prices. And then the last area is what is all around healthy food in general, and the link between agriculture and health sector, which is pushing prices for food products very high and creating new markets that didn't exist before. If you take the role of moringa, which is now seen as a very important product or ingredient into baby formula, baby food, and so something that was very easy to do, it grows in 3 months and you have a crop, the pricing of that is going up and it's impacting global markets around moringa. If you go to Zanzibar today, you can buy moringa in powder form, and a small bag like this costs you 10 euros in Zanzibar, whereas moringa, you can throw a few seeds and it grows in your backyard. So that's becoming quite expensive. So what needs to be in place for markets to succeed? In general, we need to get supply and demand to match. So what does that mean? It means abundant yields, because when we have scarcity, the prices go up. We need to have productivity to increase, because low productivity means we consume more of the inputs. We need to have efficiency, because efficiency leads to affordability. But we also need to have access, because if you have exclusive markets, then that crowds things out for others. I was very impressed by statistics that came out just after COVID, that the trade amongst East African community countries increased dramatically during COVID, particularly around food trade, because the global supply chains were constrained. So Tanzania started to export more to Kenya and vice versa, and the East African trade overall increased by more than 30%. So we see that crisis can actually lead to solutions. But let's look at the demand side. What drives the market development on the demand side? 3 key things I wanted to highlight. One is tastes and preferences. Today, if you go to New York or Washington, among the most demanded restaurants are African restaurants. Why? Because the food that we eat in Africa, complex grains, nut-based, a lot of the diet that goes around tubers like yam and sweet potato, cassava, those foods are now classified as superfoods. And so the African diet and the African way of cooking is becoming a very high demand in these modern restaurants that then drive the price and the markets for those products. I have a simpler example, which is when I was in Harare, I was very surprised that when the WHO moved to Harare, they brought an international staff. And immediately there was a cargo service of yam from Nigeria to Harare because people started eating yam, and a local market immediately developed for that. So taste and preferences are a big driver for the demand side. But then so is quantity and quality of product, and then of course whether you are using those agricultural products as a final input or an intermediary one. Another big area for the market development, particularly in regional integration, is the logistics and supply chain. We heard a lot this morning about the constraints to agriculture. And usually when we talk about logistics and supply chain, we talk about infrastructure, the roads, the railways, the shipping, whether it's ocean shipping or truck shipping. But today, with robotics, with AI, with other materials, this whole area of infrastructure for agricultural purposes is shifting dramatically. And combined with the possibility for long-distance communication digitally, we will see very soon a revolution in the way agricultural cargo is transported around the world. And we in Africa have a chance to actually do it differently. I have a colleague here who's sitting in the back who has a great idea on how to use aviation with new materials and new technologies in aviation to bring down the cost of goods transport to the level of trucking, but through air cargo. So you shorten the time and you lower the cost, and that should open up huge markets, particularly since we have a huge continent and we have not really the capacity or the resources to develop the interconnecting infrastructure. If you have to fly over the Nyungwe forest in Rwanda, you cannot build roads there because we want to protect those forests. So air cargo or air transport is a good solution. And there are many other areas there as well. Then finance is another area. This is my area of expertise, so maybe I'll say a few more things there. Access to finance for agriculture has been mentioned in almost every panel since this morning. And here I wanted to maybe share a few ideas. I think before we broke for the break, the role of central banks was mentioned. I think Josephine, I don't know where Josephine is sitting. She made a number of really excellent points. One role that central banks can play that would really open up the markets is, for example, carbon finance. We on the continent in Africa are the only continent that has the largest single undisturbed contiguous forest in the world. And it's serving a very important role in sequestering carbon as we make this transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. So in Africa, we could actually develop a carbon market, but it would require the central banks to play a role, because then we can trade amongst countries, those that have forests where the value of the sequestration is not captured by the markets, but those who will improve or restore their land. If you take, for instance, the large grazing lands from the Horn of Africa coming down to Ethiopia into northern Kenya, all the way down to Mozambique, you have huge grazing lands. Or if you take the Sahelian countries that have similar opportunities for livestock farming, any restoration of that land will immediately generate a carbon benefit. So if we can get livestock farmers to combine carbon sequestration and livestock farming, we can solve Africa's protein needs, but at the same time solve the carbon problem. But that requires carbon markets, and central banks have a critical role to play there. But then finance also requires flexibility. And here there are two areas I wanted to mention. There's a traditional, of course, debt and equity, which investors in the agribusiness require. But there are two other markets that are very critical for this finance sector to function. One is capital markets. Very few agricultural businesses access the capital markets because they are very small, and small and medium enterprises rarely participate in the capital markets. But also when they do, they can't generate a flow of revenues to investors that would be perhaps less fluctuating or more stable, that would attract the kind of investors. So you need intermediary solutions. You have guarantees, which are instruments that you could do a lot more with, but also insurance and reinsurance. As a continent, we are the least consumers of insurance products. And agriculture is a very risky sector. I'm a daughter of a farmer, and I remember the years when the price of coffee in Brazil went up and our farming crop was useless because we couldn't compete with Brazil on our little farm in the highlands in Tanzania. So being able to have insurance that can secure those fluctuations for farmers is very key. And that means developing reinsurance markets as well. But the other are commodity markets. We talked a little bit about them so far. There's a very famous one in Ethiopia, which is working very well, the commodity exchange. And we could develop many more commodity markets for products that we uniquely use on the continent. For example, if you take soybean, soybean is one of the most traded products on the global markets, commodity markets. We produce soybean in Africa. It's shipped whole to countries that eat large quantities of it. We don't even make tofu locally, which is very easy to make. So those are examples where we could raise the commodity value by more local processing and there drive that more effectively. But there are some great examples I wanted to share. For example, Sahel Capital, which is a private equity firm in Nigeria, doing very amazing innovation in the agri-space. When I was at the African Development Bank, we funded Sahel Capital. I know this morning there were some examples of where the African Development Bank took a long time to fund President Obasanjo's request. But there are some areas where it goes very quickly, and private equity is one of them. I just wanted to highlight that example. I'll now move to trade and trade finance, because that's a key area for regional integration, but also opening up markets.
Because you mentioned Nigeria, Big Brother says you have 1 minute remaining.
Oh, thank you. So trade and trade finance are very critical. Trade within our agricultural market starts between rural and urban trade, first of all, because most of the food at the moment is grown in the rural areas, even if we have a little bit of urban agriculture. But then we have the intercity trade, which trades most of the primary processed food products, slight packaging, processing and canning as an example. But then the real challenge for us is on the global trade, where Africa doesn't participate as highly as it could. We heard this morning the statistic, 3% of global trade. And we have a number of agreements, but they're coming to an end or they're being renegotiated. So the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act is an example where there are special provisions for African countries that can export food to the United States under that agreement. It's coming to an end very soon. But very few countries have been able to participate in it because of being able to invest in what would be required for the phytosanitary conditions. So in order to increase trade, we have to invest in capacity building, standardization, and other sanitary investments that would allow food products to be exported. You take cashew nuts, which is grown in Cote d'Ivoire, in Tanzania, and even here in Ghana. It's one of the most demanded products now because it's a substitute for dairy milk. So all the people who want to have plant-based milk, they are now switching to almond milk and cashew milk instead of rice milk or soy milk, which was very popular before. So that means cashew farmers have an opportunity now to participate in a very high value-added market, but to do that, they have to meet those phytosanitary conditions. So to speed up trade, we have to invest in capacity building and health-related inspections and standards. In investment and trade finance, I think I mentioned already infrastructure and the markets that we need to invest in, but I think Africa could benefit a great deal from investing in the digital economy for the purposes of agricultural trade. Simple examples, data and analytics. We could improve the quality of markets and the performance of markets in agriculture if we invested more in data and analytics. I have a very simple example. A colleague posted on LinkedIn last year a map of Africa with all the unique foods that are grown and eaten in different parts of Africa. And that launched what we now call the Jollof Rice War. And I think UNESCO had to come in and arbitrate between Ghana, Nigeria, and other countries that all said jollof rice was born in their countries. Now, it's a funny story to tell, but the bottom line of that is it's a rice that is grown and eaten in Africa that is very particular and very tasty. It's now very popular in the rest of the world, but for it to get to that level, we had to have a young person post a simple map of Africa with the foods in every part of Africa, and that generated all the way to a UNESCO classification. So now jollof rice is like the most expensive French wines. It can be classified, and we know exactly who's growing what quality where, and it becomes immediately more expensive in the global market. So these are the kind of things that can be driven through the digital economy, data analytics, and then linking up to the other areas. We could do the same with carbon markets and pharmaceuticals or other areas as well. In the interest of time, because I think I have to end soon, there are a number of stresses to the agricultural sector that are impinging on market development. One is water. We are a continent that has the richest underground water resources in the world. Because of the way the earth is tilted, underneath our land in Africa are the largest freshwater resources in the world. But we are not utilizing it because we do very little irrigation. Our surface water is contaminated and overutilized. So those water stresses are now putting urban areas and agricultural land in competition. But there are solutions that I'm happy to share. The Lake Tana River in Kenya, they were able to have the Wildlife Association, farmers, and the residents of the city of Nairobi work together to manage the whole water basin and therefore get the water pricing right and the water markets working for agriculture, for wildlife, and for the city. So it is possible to do it, but water stress is one area we have to worry about in Africa. And maybe I have predicted that water mining is probably going to be the most lucrative activity in the future because we have very rich underground water resources. Of course, land markets are equally problematic and we need to work on those, but we have other areas as well. I mentioned forestry already, so I'll skip through that. I want to say a few words about new technology.
Why don't I put you on the spot while you join us on the panel so that you speak on that?
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for her.
I want to close with a proverb, if you allow
I would
me.
allow you to do that on
Thank
the panel.
you.
The minister will have to leave at 5,
Yes.
so please let me have them join us.
I will close with a proverb. So in Swahili, we have a lot of proverbs, and I thought there are two that really summarize what I wanted to share with you today. And one is about innovation, and it says, to stumble is not to fall down, it is to fall forward. So since we need innovation in agriculture, and we stumbled a lot over the last couple of decades, I thought this one would be very appropriate. And then the last one, which is on regional integration, it says, a good thing sells itself. It doesn't need marketing, but a bad thing needs a lot of promotion. So I think we launched the Continental Free Trade Area. It's selling itself, so let's go and get it done. Thank you very much.
Talk of good names and make welcome to the panel former President of the Republic of Benin, His Excellency Thomas Yayi Bone. His Excellency Ernest Bai Koroma is the former President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, and the Honorable Dr. Brian Echampong is the Minister for Food and Agriculture, the Republic of Ghana. A round of applause as they come up stage. Your Excellencies, thank you very much for joining us, together with the Honorable Minister. The Honorable Minister would have to leave us at 5, so permit me to engage him early. Honorable Minister, from all that has been discussed, it is evident that despite the many initiatives that government puts in place, good plans, strategies and all, the welfare of farmers particularly is something which must be looked at. They are not deriving the most from all these initiatives that government puts in place. Tell us, you are the Minister of Agriculture. What can government do to enhance the welfare of farmers?
Thank you very much. I think the government of Ghana in 2017, when the Nana Addo Akufo-Addo government came to power, decided that they have to do something for farmers. First of all, the yields of farmers were very low. Averagely, for the cereals, we were doing about 3 metric tons per hectare. So one of the first programs that was rolled out is a Planting for Food and Jobs, which then subsidize seeds, improve seeds, and fertilizer. That has averagely increased the yields of cereals to about 6 metric tons per hectare. That increased productivity has invariably put money in the pockets of farmers. The president said on this stage that the subsidy program in itself is not sustainable. We've reduced subsidies to about 15% now for 2022. In 2023, we are planning to roll out a new program that will actually further boost the incomes of farmers by, one, implementing an input credit system. We all know that machinery, seeds, improved seeds that is, and fertilizer contributes about 80 to 85% of the cost of production of a farmer. And therefore, if we are able to provide these services on credit to a farmer, it thereby saves the farmer the money to be able to apply to working capital. And because in Ghana we have been able to successfully implement the Ghana card system effectively, as we know it now, we are able to link the Ghana card or a farmer to their farm and their crop, and be able to, if we succeed in giving them these input credits, then and improve seeds, hopefully to increase it from the current average for cereal 6 metric ton to 10 or 12 metric tons that we're targeting, then the lots of a farmer is going to improve. So our strategy today as a government is very clear. We've been able to stabilize the agric industry for about our 3.5 million farmers. We want to ensure that they double their productivity and by so doing make some good money. And hopefully by doing so, the prices, we also talk about trying to get products to the market very cheap. But very cheap means that the farmer is not getting the good price. That is not what we're talking about. We are talking about reducing the linkages from farm to fork, or farm to the dining table, if I would say. If we're able to cut out that middleman that increases the cost of the products to the household, then we can split the cost between the farmer getting a higher value for his or her produce and stable prices for consumers. So all these strategies that we have rolled out in the last 6 years through the Planting for Food and Jobs, and what we intend to roll out this June, will ensure that farmers get good money for their produce. There's stability on the market for consumers, and if business are interested in the processing or the trade, the agribusiness side, there's also room for them to make some money. So that's what we're doing to improve the lots of our Ghanaian farmers. You know that in the cocoa sector, we have been able to push for a living income differential when Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire joined forces to say that, look, our farmers are not getting the right money because we felt that they were being cheated. And the market agreed to that living income differential, and quite a few welfare programs that we are rolling out. But all in all, we believe that agric is serious business. Yeah. It should be seen as such for the farmer, and it should be seen as such for all those in the value chain. And therefore, it should be private sector driven. Government should only control the levers and make sure that it works for the farmer and the consumer. And that's exactly what we're doing.
If that is your focus, let me just tie it up with this question. How can African economies break free from the donor syndrome? I asked this on the back of cocoa syndication loans. Agribusiness now is serious business. Yet every year, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, will have to syndicate loans across the world in order to export our cocoa and derive income from that. What are some of the plans to break free from all these donor syndromes?
Well, I think it was just a low-hanging fruit that from the 50s, 60s, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire had taken advantage of forward sell your beans, make some money, and then that's pretty much it. But you find out from the next cocoa season, the 23-24 cocoa season, that Ghana is breaking away from that.
Okay.
We are not going to go the route of pledging 100% of our cocoa to the syndication market. I have directed Cocoa Board to look at a mix and hopefully bring the syndication to under 40%.
Okay.
Because you have the cocoa. You have sole control of your cocoa. And the market is there. The cocoa processors are there to give you money, even if you decide that you won't take syndication loans. All the processors are there waiting to give you money to pick the cocoa anyway, what we call spot. So I have directed that they look at it. And this year, you will see that if there will be any syndication at all on cocoa, we are going to break free from what we have been doing from the 60s. Again, it is an easy way that we got money, but there is a way that we can do it to get more value for our money. If we succeed in doing that, all those huge transactional fees that are normally tagged with syndication loans will all be waived off. The tens of millions of dollars that when you do a syndication of $2 billion, you pay about $50 million in syndication fees. You realize that those become savings that can be passed on to the farmer. So we have a way out of it, and this year we're starting that program.
Okay, let me just take the last one, and then, Honorable Minister, you can take leave of us. We're talking about AFTA and its, effects on our economies. Let me ask you, how do we maintain this delicate balance, or ensure this delicate balance between intra-Africa trade and external trade to the rest of the world? What is the mix going to look like?
Well, I think it's a market. It's a demand and supply. And countries will sell to those who are offering the best value. But we also have to find a way to preserve our market. For example, the mere mention of GMO in Ghana, if I go and announce today that Ghana is going to go the GMO way, today, tomorrow I'll be former Minister for Agriculture. It's quite simple. But we import chicken from GMO markets. We import a lot of tomatoes from Burkina Faso. In fact, between January and April, we had to import a lot of tomato from Burkina Faso. But we all know that Burkina Faso uses a lot of GMO as seeds. We import Indomie, GMO. So everybody in this room, especially those from Africa, when we travel, we consume GMO. Even in country, we import GMO. But when we talk, immediately you mention the name that, look, we're going to go this way. You will be former president or former agri minister. We don't want to hear about it. So if we can preserve our values, if this is what we want, and we want to trade amongst ourselves, then there is a way to do it by having an understanding that Zimbabwe today is producing a lot of wheat, and we are going to dedicate our importation of wheat not from external markets, but from Zimbabwe. But Zimbabwe must also commit that I have excess maize. I produce more than I consume in terms of maize. In fact, a lot of the stuff in Ghana, we produce more than we consume. So if Zimbabwe is going to commit to buying my maize, and I commit to buying Zimbabwe's maize, then it's a way to go. But it cannot be that I'm buying wheat from Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe is buying its maize from China or India, and then what kind of the field is that's not level. So we have to look at, I think it's mentioned on this stage, that we have to look at where we have competitive advantage in the continent and have an understanding that, look, for rice, go to Ghana. For tomato, go to Ghana. For maize, go to Ghana. Pretty much Ghana must have the most competitive advantage overall. But that understanding must be made that, look, within Africa, and AFTA must champion that if you want this product, we recommend that you go to this country to import that product. So that if that understanding is there, then we can specialize in producing those products for the continent. It doesn't mean that we're going to stop producing other things. But if there's an understanding that, look, today Zimbabwe has taken the lead on wheat, and therefore Africa, if you want to buy wheat, don't go to Ukraine. Look at Zimbabwe. And the same way, if you want to buy maize, look at Ghana. If you want to buy soya, look at Nigeria. If you want to buy this, then that understanding is there, that framework is there, we can ride on it. But we cannot be buying from countries, and then those countries are also looking external. I'm sure that AFCTA can look at that, the African Union can look at that, and then advise how we transact amongst ourselves in the continent.
Ladies and gentlemen, he's the new Minister for Agric of the Republic of Ghana, the Honorable Brian Echampong. A round of applause for him. We know it's Thursday and cabinet beckons, and so we would allow you to take leave of us, but trust me, we'll get back to you on great outcomes. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause as he takes leave of us. Thank you very much. And so for the next 15 minutes, ours is a wonderful conversation on markets as a driver for fostering agricultural productivity in Africa. Your Excellencies, I want to come at you with a very simple question. You have been around, you've seen it all. I want to ask you, it is believed that African agricultural economies have not been developed with Africa in mind. They have just been put together to serve the metropolises of capitalism. What do you say about this, and what can we do to change that configuration?
You?
Yes, Your Excellency.
Well, thank you, Mr. Moderator. The African economies for the international world are not for Africa. Well, I will say for the agricultural aspect of it, we have to look at two angles. One is the production for local consumption by the farmers themselves, and what is available in the market and at what price. Now, I must say that we have not been doing well in terms of local production and local marketing. This is because our agricultural methods have been subsistent, and we have until recently not been addressing the issues of promoting local agriculture. But with the Maputo Declaration and others, the CADEP process, there has been a great opening in the African agricultural engagement to the extent that countries were now motivated to become, to qualify for the CADEP recognition. And from that point onwards, some action was happening within the local market, but we are still not there yet. And that is why we welcome the establishment of the AFCTA. We believe this is a great platform that can be used to change the narrative. And there are various aspects of it that can be used. But of course, even as we are getting to the FTA, we have been utilizing more of the international market. That is why the trade within us is still below the 20% that we consider very deplorable as against what we deal with Europe. I mean, Europe-Africa trade is at the region of 60-65%. This is a proportion that needs to be changed if we have to change the narrative. But I believe that is why we are here. And the issue can not be addressed in just one engagement because it is multifaceted. How do you improve the productivity of the local farmer? How do we ensure that the markets are efficient, the market environment works? Because it is all encompassing. The farmer, for him to improve on his productivity, he will require the right price. And for him to have the right price, it will require competition with the external farmer. I mean, the external farmer from abroad. And the cost of money comes into play. His cost of production will also come into play. How much will it cost the ordinary rice farmer to grow 25 kilograms of rice? In our country, a bag of rice that is locally produced is more expensive than the imported. And now, when you put these two in the markets, it will result to affordability. The consumer will go for what is affordable because he wants to exist. So there's a lot of things at play that I believe this platform is most welcome, and we can use it as a vehicle to address the issues in the aspect of marketing. We address the issue of pricing. We address the issue of access to the markets. We will have to address the issue of the infrastructure, not only the road infrastructure, but communication infrastructure, electricity infrastructure, and the value chain. These are all processes. So it brings a lot of activities at work. That is why for us to be able to make a difference and to move forward, this is the best opportunity. We still have challenges. We have come a long way, but we are still very much away from getting there. And,
so, Your Excellency,
this.
I don't mean to cut you, but if I'm to surmise from what you've delivered so far, you are trying to say it needs a 360 appreciation of the situation. Access to market, access to finance, access to infrastructure, skills, and the entire wherewithal to make these things, conducive. Okay, let me come to His Excellency Yaya Boni. What's your take on this issue?
Je pense que nous sommes en train de parler, disons, de beaucoup de choses à la fois. Oh, excuse me, you need now to... Je vous demande d'enlever de reprendre, les écouteurs, puisque jusque-là, until now we did speak in English. Let's move out to speak French. I'll go in French. Donc, je voulais vous dire que nous parlons de beaucoup de choses sur le continent, mais je dois dire que dans un premier temps, nous avons une question de gouvernance. Do you hear me? Please, do you hear me? Yes. Okay, thank you very much. Je disais que nous sommes en train de parler, pour moi, d'une question de gouvernance. Et rendons grâce à Dieu, l'Afrique est en train de mouvoir. L'Afrique évolue. pour tenir compte des mutations sur le continent, dans chacun de nos États, nos régions et dans le monde. Je pense que, en ce qui concerne l'agriculture, le thème qui a été soulevé, je veux remercier le secrétaire général, disons, de la zone de libre-échange, le haut management pour avoir programmé ce forum. Et merci à mes collègues aussi qui ont pu braver leur agenda pour y rehausser de leur présence cette séance d'échange. On en fera encore, puisque le temps change. Merci au président Nana qui a accepté, en dépit de son agenda chargé, d'avoir fait le déplacement pour présider cette rencontre de la zone de libre-échange, ce grand projet du siècle. Chers amis, je voudrais dire que je ne voudrais pas revenir en arrière par rapport à ce que mon collègue a dit, le président Ernest, mais dire que j'ai le sentiment que la question agricole est, j'allais dire, une priorité. Une manière de dire merci pour avoir programmé ce débat. Pour la simple raison que nous devions régler en matière de zone de libre-échange, régler les questions prioritaires. Et l'agriculture en est une. Alors, là où je voudrais en arriver, c'est que, d'une manière générale, pour répondre à la question, je reviens, nous avons connu un problème de gouvernance, d'une manière générale, où à un moment donné, nous faisons ce que nous ne voulons pas. Nous faisons ce que nous ne voulons pas. En ce sens que nous ne sommes pas arrivés à asseoir, j'allais dire, un environnement, j'allais dire, l'assainissement de l'environnement qui nous permette de faire de manière correcte ce que nous devons faire. Jusque-là, nous l'avons fait séparément. Au lieu de le faire ensemble, puisqu'ensemble, nous sommes plus forts. Et ensemble, nous pourrions diversifier les points de vue, mutualiser les efforts, les ressources pour pouvoir sortir au profit de nos populations des produits de qualité. Rendons grâce à Dieu. En 2012, je crois, je présidais à l'Union africaine, où cette idée a été lancée, la zone de libre-échange. Et je remercie les collègues qui sont venus après pour la mise en place. Et nous sommes engagés, nous tous, et je voudrais d'ores et déjà rassurer, disons, le management, disons, de ce grand projet dont nous faisons la promotion aujourd'hui, renouveler notre engagement à leur côté. Bon, en ce qui concerne la question agricole, moi je voudrais dire que, à vrai dire, d'une manière générale, du point de vue de la gouvernance des secteurs d'activité économique, l'agriculture a toujours été, nous reconnaissons partout que c'est le fondement, c'est le cœur de nos économies, que c'est la base de notre économie, parce que, utilisant une grande proportion de notre jeunesse, parce que, naturellement, répondant aux problèmes, à la problématique de la sécurité alimentaire, parce que, pour plusieurs raisons également, qu'on ne peut pas évoquer immédiatement, compte tenu du temps. Mais nous, jusque-là, tout en reconnaissant l'importance de cette agriculture, nous n'avons pas su identifier les piliers qui nous permettent, disons, d'aller de l'avant, dans le temps. La question de la formation, la question, disons, des infrastructures, comme l'a dit mon collègue Ernest. L'eau, puisque quand nous voyons le continent africain, c'est vrai, il y a certaines parties d'eau, certaines parties de notre continent qui contiennent de l'eau. Vous prenez la zone de Guinée-Conakry, l'Afrique centrale, la Guinée équatoriale, bon, peut-être le Nigeria, etc. C'est une partie. Comme il y en a une partie qui souffre, disons, du déficit d'eau pour l'agriculture telle que la zone sahélienne. Bon, donc, comment gérer cette situation-là? Ben, lorsque nous prenons ce que nous avons géré dans le temps, puisque moi je suis venu aux affaires, disons, en 2006, pour moi, j'ai estimé que c'était une question fondamentale. Donc, étant à retenir que la question de l'eau, la question des routes, la question des pistes rurales, la question des marchés, la question de la qualité des produits, la question des engrais, la question de la qualité naturellement, la distribution, la méthode de travail, etc. En ce qui concerne cette gouvernance agricole. Mais c'est la déclaration de Maputo qui nous a fait prendre conscience, où nous disons que chaque État doit pouvoir tout au moins travailler de manière à ce que la croissance agricole, tout au moins, excède 6% par an pour que nous puissions aller de l'avant et au moins 10%, disons, des dépenses budgétaires, des dépenses. Donc, sur cette base-là, je dois vous dire que nous avons enregistré, certains pays ont enregistré certains résultats et d'autres n'ont pas pu pour des raisons que vous connaissez très bien. Donc, là, je suis en train de parler de l'agriculture de subsistance qui, jusque-là, n'a pas pu encore régler, jusqu'on n'a pas pu régler, puisqu'il y a encore, comme on vient de le reconnaître, la pauvreté sur notre continent. Et que ce grand projet de Sélécam vient à point nommé. Nous avons également des productions industrielles telles que le coton et autres. Aujourd'hui, nous parlons du soja, de noix de cajou, etc. Et qui pose problème. Alors, comment nous allons pouvoir, dans cette affaire, au-delà de tout, avant de rentrer dans le détail, régler la question de la rémunération de la production? Il faut produire. Une fois la production, pense à la consommation. On ne peut pas consommer ce qu'on ne produit pas. Autrement, alors nous sommes obligés d'importer de l'extérieur, ce que nous ne voulons pas avec ce grand projet. Alors donc nous pouvons, ce que nous devons faire maintenant, est comment mieux rémunérer la production. C'est une question fondamentale. Il y a des situations bizarres qui se présentent dans certains de nos pays en ce moment. Ce n'est pas une critique. Nous sommes là pour échanger. Et à ce niveau-là, par exemple, si c'est des questions industrielles, le coton, le cajou, etc., et pratiquement, vous savez, au moment où je vous parle, dans certains pays, il y a des producteurs qui ont leur production sous le bras. Le gouvernement pousse à produire, mais du point de vue de la commercialisation, n'est-ce pas? Et jusque-là, excusez-moi, je dois préciser, c'est des questions qui ne sont même pas des productions qui ne sont pas travaillées.
Your Excellency, can I just interject and add something? So we're talking about support, we're talking of incentives. Most of the countries that intend to go, commercial, are on certain kind of programs.
I don't think so. It's going in Portuguese. I don't know why.
Please go back to French for His Excellency.
I'm speaking French. No, in Portuguese.
Okay.
Okay, it's okay now. Yes.
Most of the African countries that want to commercialize their agriculture,
go ahead.
They want to do so like the West. But there are certain programs like IMF and World Bank programs, and you know the conditionalities that come with these programs. For example, no incentives to farmers and other players within the value chain. From these submissions that you've made, how can governments ensure that within the framework of maximizing agricultural output in their countries, these conditionalities don't come to bear on the agri sector?
sais pas si j'ai bien compris votre question. Ce que je voudrais vous dire, c'est comment mieux rémunérer les producteurs. Je ne sais pas si je suis sur la ligne de votre question, de votre préoccupation. Comment mieux rémunérer les producteurs dans nos pays sans que cela ne cause d'autres dégâts. C'est bien possible de le faire. J'ai dit que dans certains pays, on ne rémunère pas les producteurs correctement, mais avec la prise de conscience. Par exemple, je vais parler du café, du cacao, et j'ai ajouté du cajou, du soja, du coton, etc. Donc, pour mieux rémunérer ces producteurs, par exemple, il faut le faire. Autrement, les filières vont disparaître. Naturellement, on veut produire pour transformer. D'abord, on ne consomme pas le coton fibre, par exemple. Nous consommons des tissus. Si nous voulons transformer le coton en tissu, alors les transformateurs sont obligés d'être mieux rémunérés aussi. Et naturellement, nous voulons que ce produit-là soit consommé dans notre continent. Et naturellement, s'il y a un excédent, nous exportons. Alors, comment mieux, si nous rémunérons correctement les producteurs pour ne pas tuer la filière coton, alors ce qu'il faut faire, eh bien, le coton fibre est transformé en produit fini, n'est-ce pas? En produit fini, et peut-être subventionné par les productions qui viennent de l'extérieur. C'est-à-dire que les droits des douanes doivent être de telle manière que les transformateurs soient aussi encouragés à continuer de transformer nos productions locales pour plus de valeur ajoutée. Ça, c'est le cas du coton. Je ne vais pas rentrer dans les détails de tout. Coton, cajou, etc. Même les productions vivrières, je ne sais pas si cette question vous intéresse aussi. Pour les productions vivrières, il est temps que nous puissions régler, nous sortions de l'agriculture de subsistance. Régler pour réaliser la sécurité alimentaire. Et de ce point de vue-là également, je crois que nous butons sur un certain nombre d'obstacles majeurs. J'y fais allusion, j'allais dire, à la qualité de ces productions, à la formation des producteurs. Je fais allusion, j'allais dire, au problème que pose le foncier. Je fais allusion aux pistes rurales. Je fais allusion aux infrastructures routières, aériennes. Je fais allusion à la production des engrais. Quel type d'engrais? La qualité d'engrais, etc. Parce que nous devons les produire sur place. Et nous en avons les moyens parce que Dieu nous a tout donné. C'est pourquoi au début je disais que si nous continuons de faire ce que nous ne voulons pas, ou ce qui n'est pas bon, ça veut dire que nous ne sommes pas conscients de ce fait que le Saint-Esprit vit en nous, que Dieu vit en nous. Ne me reprochez pas de parler de Dieu ici, non. C'est pour vous dire quoi? La bonne gouvernance se pose à ce niveau-là, et nous devons absolument revoir ces questions. Naturellement, je laisse tomber les questions politiques, du point de vue de la démocratie, du respect des droits de l'homme, du respect des libertés fondamentales, parce que lorsque vous donnez le sentiment de mettre sous esclavage les producteurs qui produisent sous le soleil, sous la pluie, et que ce soit d'autres, des intermédiaires qui tirent profit, ou alors c'est une seule personne qui est propriétaire de ces filières, c'est-à-dire dans une situation de monopole, et que c'est cette personne-là qui pratiquement tire profit du fruit du travail de ces pauvres, nous faisons de la mauvaise gouvernance. C'est de ça que j'ai voulu dire. Et nous avons des cas comme ça sur le continent africain. Donc, nous avons énormément de problèmes et je n'ai pas pour faire peur au secrétaire général de notre projet dont nous parlons aujourd'hui, la zone de libre-échange. C'est une bonne chose. Nous aurons le temps encore d'améliorer les échanges. Alors donc, de ce point de vue, nous avons beaucoup à nous dire.
Okay.
Je ne sais pas si vous avez d'autres questions, mais je suis à votre disposition.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let me go to Dr. Franny Lotier. You come from a development finance background. Share with us. Let me just veer off a little. Let's go to AFTA. What can Africa's partners do to really support the work of AFTA in creating one single market with emphasis on unlocking Africa's agricultural potential?
Thank you for the question, moderator. There are two main areas which I believe Africa's partners can help Africa progress on the continental free trade area. The first one is coming up very shortly, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, on the renewal of the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which is coming to an end by 2025-26. In thinking about how Africa could relate then, for example, in that case with the United States, or if you take the example of everything but arms with Europe, instead of trading bilaterally with each country in Africa, partners of Africa could actually help speed up regional integration by trading and negotiating with the African Union on behalf of all African countries. And I think that could help then all of these great ideas that came up this afternoon on specialization, developing of opportunities for intra-country trade and trade within Africa itself, but also creating the local markets that will be very critical. If you take the example of the textile sector, which has benefited from non-tariff barriers vis-à-vis the United States, it took countries from Asia to come and manufacture in Africa for some countries to actually be able to export textiles to the United States under AGOA. So I think there could be a lot that can be done by improving the capacity for local production, investing particularly in energy, because a lot of local transformation and manufacturing actually relies on energy. And energy is one of the hungriest sectors we have in Africa. I remember when I first met with President Yai Boni in Benin when he was head of state, we were talking about Vlisco, which is most of our African clothing. The designs are African, traditionally African, but all the manufacturing is mostly done outside. And the company that actually owns that brand is a Dutch company. And I remember President Yai Boni was trying to get Benin to actually own Vlisco and manufacture locally so that what we call African clothing becomes truly African. So that's an example where with agreements, for instance, under AGOA, African countries could improve their cotton to textile value chain, and that could be driven and improved even further by having it linked then to the services side, which is the design and fashion industry, as an example. The same thing could be done with cocoa. We talked earlier this afternoon about that. But the other area, and I want to use an example from Benin as well, is take the simple example of pineapples. I don't know if you've tasted the pineapples from Benin, but they're really delicious. But they also happen to have one unique product, which is the core of the pineapple. When you extract from it, there are molecules in it that are quite unique to that particular type of pineapple, which causes the human body to slim. So the companies that make weight loss pills are using that core of the pineapple to do that. But we don't manufacture it on the continent. And if you can look at the weight loss industry globally is a huge industry, which Africa could tap into if you could go from manufacturing, growing pineapples to manufacturing that molecule or extracting that molecule. Likewise for cocoa, I saw research recently by L'Oreal. They are now extracting from the cocoa pod the molecules that are very important for developing very high value added cosmetic products. So these are ways in which Africa can add more value with the same product. And the last area for cocoa, where again partners of Africa could help in that area. If you move away from single cropping of growing just the cocoa trees, for example, but you bring in shade trees, which farmers are now quite interested to do, then a cocoa farmer could benefit not only from the cocoa sales, but also from carbon trading. And I think President Koroma, you mentioned many of the other areas where partners could help, for example, investing in infrastructure. The World Bank, the African Development Bank have invested heavily in supporting African countries to build the infrastructure that they need. In fact, the last 200 kilometers of highway was inaugurated in Tanzania because this was the last segment that completed the interconnection of Africa north to south and east to west. So now Africa is fully connected by roads. But of course, it leaves the vast interior of Africa not connected, so there's still a lot of work to do there. And then lastly, I think partners of Africa could help support the very dynamic growth of innovation in finance, of what we call finnovation, because that is critically needed for agriculture. And if they're able to support, for example, digital platforms that provide low-income working capital loans to farmers, bringing in solutions in the insurance industry, supporting banks that lend to agriculture to develop guarantee products, or even helping countries actually improve their local commodity markets and the capital market products that could be available for farmers, because very few farmers participate in those areas. So I think those are just a sample of things that partners of Africa could invest in.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And so we've been talking about the market as a driver for fostering agricultural productivity in Africa through the lenses of plans, strategies, and programs to support the sector, Africa's demographic dividend, I beg your pardon, and how it can be utilized. Customization of Africa's agricultural efforts. We've also talked about AFTA in the light of Africa's trade relations now in the future. Partnership support for sustained and successful positive outcomes. We've talked about Africa's independence from donor-recipient partners and the perfect balance between intra-Africa trade and external trade under AFTA. Your Excellencies, I want us to close with one or two sentences. When all this is stripped and we leave this place, if we are to talk about the markets and we are to talk about how we can drive it to foster agricultural productivity in Ghana, what are the two takeaways that we should walk away with?
In Ghana?
Here and across the continent.
Well, for me, the markets are very critical. In fact, the markets can
What?
The issue here is the pricing and the access to the market.
Okay.
The pricing will have to do with what will be the going cost of the end product. That will depend on the cost of its production. And it also will depend on the cost of the money used in producing it. So there has to be a balance here.
Okay.
There has to be some innovativeness on how to make it competitive. When we have it right, by way of a price that will give return to the farmer will be able to produce more. They will have better yields, and they can even invest for a future development. Now, on the issue of access to the markets, it also will require us to improve on our infrastructure, having the right information about the markets, moving our goods from point A to point B. If a farmer in West Africa finds it extremely difficult or very expensive to move his items to East Africa, then I think if you insist on doing that, by the time the goods get to East Africa, it will become cheaper for the East African consumer to buy a good from China.
Okay.
Because of the price variables. Okay. So I think we have to look at a way of addressing this issue.
Pricing.
Let me make this point that I was impressed this morning that when somebody made a statement during our lunch, I think a banker from Tanzania, that when the president introduced a policy, they worked on it and found a way of ensuring that it becomes profitable to go to the banks and lend. And I think we have to focus on that, especially the banks, the government, and the farmers or representatives of the farmers. We have to find a way of thinking out of the box to ensure that we come up with loans and guarantees and even insurance backup that will reduce the risk aspect of these farming activities. I see nothing wrong in giving subsidies to farmers, nothing wrong in supporting the farming process, nothing wrong in supporting banks that give loans. Because, I mean, if countries in the West can give support to their banks when they are in crisis, we should consider this as a crisis. We have to move forward. We have to find a way of supporting the banks or coming up with initiatives that will address this financial problem of our farmers. If we don't address this problem, we'll be spinning around on the same point without making progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me come to Doc, and then Your Excellency, Yaboni, you'll be the last to wrap it up for us.
So I would say, yes, I would say three things. You asked for closing comments, right? The first thing I would say is Africa is rich, very rich in natural resources, land, tremendous products from our forests. We could pretty much throw seeds and they grow in some of our countries. You don't even need to do much about it. So I think we really should harness that wealth and make it add value to the development of Africa. Second, Africa is young. We have a lot of young people. We're the youngest continent in the world. By 2050, 3 out of 5 persons who are under 19 will be African. So using that wealth of youth, we need to excite young people to go into agriculture. And we can do that by bringing in digital technologies like AI, robotics, blockchain, having the youth participate in new ideas and innovations, whether it's scientific research and discovery, having youth be engaged in small-scale processing and transformation of agricultural products, but even take up the very complex logistics issues that agriculture sector needs. So I think that's on the young. But then the last thing I would say is Africa, while we are trying to be connected, we are not quite there yet, but I would say that we are probably a highly optimistic continent, and therefore we can build on that optimism to develop and bridge the gaps that we've been talking about since this morning, whether it's in the markets, whether it's access to finance, whether it's infrastructure, because when you're optimistic, you invest in the future. And so I would say we are rich, we are young, and we are optimistic, and any such combination gives you the recipe for success.
Okay. Your Excellency, Yaiboni.
Oui. Je voudrais remercier ma soeur qui a su répondre. Ben, je voudrais attirer l'attention en présence du secrétaire général de la zone de libre-échange et face à mes collègues que j'ai remarqué, sans m'éloigner de votre préoccupation, mon cher ami, que d'un État à l'autre, nous sommes en Afrique de l'Ouest aujourd'hui. Peut-être que nous allons nous retrouver en Afrique de l'Est. Nous sommes, par exemple, je dis en Afrique de l'Ouest, pour la simple raison que nous avons, comme vous le savez bien, des communautés économiques régionales sur le continent. En ce qui concerne la CEDEAO, la communauté économique des États de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, j'ai remarqué que lorsque nous prenons chacun de ces produits, c'est un exemple que je donne, et le soja, un exemple que je donne, c'est un produit cru. Un produit du cru, c'est-à-dire que dans notre schéma de libéralisation des échanges au sein de la CEDEAO, ces produits cru doivent circuler librement. Autrement, si nous portons des interdictions pour que ces produits ne quittent pas, un exemple que je donne, le Bénin pour aller vers le Togo ou pour aller vers le Nigeria, nous violons, eh bien, j'allais dire, cette disposition en matière de schéma de libéralisation des échanges au sein de la CEDEAO. Et comment on peut expliquer cela? C'est-à-dire que l'État décide d'acheter moins cher aux producteurs de soja. Le soja, c'est une production, ma soeur connaît très bien, n'est-ce pas? C'est une production qui n'a pas besoin de suffisamment d'engrais, non. En fait, c'est le fruit du producteur, sous le soleil, sous la pluie. Qu'est-ce que l'État va chercher? À fixer un prix. Alors nous sommes dans une économie, dans un espace libéral. Nous parlons de la démocratie, du libéralisme, etc. Donc on laisse le marché jouer. Alors, lorsque nous voulons plafonner, disons, le prix, les prix aux producteurs, ça veut dire que nous sommes prêts à tuer, disons, la filière soja. Alors, donc, d'une manière générale, dans ce pays, je veux dire, qui achète moins cher ce produit, alors qu'au Togo, par exemple, c'est 500 francs le kilo, et au Bénin, 190 francs. Comment on pourrait expliquer cela? Et c'est un exemple qui me vient comme ça. Donc, ça veut dire que devant le secrétaire général de la zone de libre-échange continentale, nous avons encore du travail à faire. Et que il nous appartient maintenant de faire en sorte que comment nous allons harmoniser la gouvernance, disons, de ces problèmes-là agricoles, de manière à ce que, eh bien, si c'est une zone de libre-échange, en principe, il n'y a pas de droit de douane d'un État à l'autre à l'intérieur de la zone de libre-échange. Alors, si nous en sommes conscients, donc ça veut dire qu'il faudrait que chacun des États fasse tout possible pour une meilleure gouvernance, de manière à ce que eh bien, les prix soient presque harmonisés et que les producteurs ne souffrent pas d'un État par rapport à un autre. Alors, si c'est pour moi, parce que des fois, j'aurais à discuter avec le secrétaire général tout à l'heure, tantôt nous parlons du marché commun ou d'une union douanière, il faut que ce soit clair. Si ce ne peut pas être une union douanière, puisque aucune de nos institutions n'est la CEDEAO. Nous n'avons pas une politique douanière commune. Nous sommes en ce moment à l'étape de zone de libre-échange. En ce moment, j'encourage le secrétaire général à ce que les spécialistes se retrouvent et que les pratiquants, s'ils nous considèrent, ils continuent de nous considérer, je suis convaincu, que nous puissions nous comprendre à ce niveau-là. Donc, pour moi, en conclusion, qu'est-ce que je voulais dire? La zone de libre-échange continentale est un grand projet du siècle.
All right.
Non, excuse me. 1 minute. I finish. C'est une zone de... c'est un grand projet qui est très important, mais malheureusement, il va falloir, comme je viens de le dire, que nous ne fassions pas ce que nous ne voulons pas. C'est-à-dire, il va falloir introduire une meilleure gouvernance dans la gestion des affaires de nos pays, de manière à ce que ce projet du siècle, qui fait de notre continent une zone de libre-échange la plus vaste, vous venez de le dire, plus de 2,5 milliards d'âmes, peut-être d'ici 2050, dont le PIB peut-être fait, alors, comme 2500 milliards en dollars, pardon, excusez-moi. Donc, autant d'atouts, la population, autant de superficie, autant de potentialités, les ressources minières, pétrolières, etc., que ce zone-là, est-ce que ce projet-là soit importante.
Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause. And clearly, this has laid a solid foundation for tomorrow's panel discussion on mobilizing African stakeholders to ensure a successful implementation of the AFCFTA. Majority of the things that are coming out right now will feed into that discussion. But for now, help me say a very big thank you to my very amazing panel. They've been very rich in insight, and they've left us with a dose to ponder on. For me, my particular takeout is that we are rich, we're young, and we're optimistic. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me say thank you to His Excellency Thomas Yayi-Boni, former President of the Republic of Benin, His Excellency Ernest Bai Koroma, former President of the Republic of Sierra Leone. He joined us, but had to leave, the Minister for Food and Agriculture, the Republic of Ghana, the Honorable Brian De Champong, and last but certainly not the least, Senior Partner and CEO, Southridge Investments, Dr. Franny Lotier. Please, a round of applause for them. I'm grateful for your expertise and your insight. It will do us a lot of good in the next session. Please, a photograph. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you. Grateful. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask that we applaud ourselves. We've done well. We've stayed the course. Oh, please, you deserve it. Please, give yourselves a round of applause. At 7:30 exactly, we shall reconvene in this place, and it will really not be for talking, and it will be a party. Are we ready to wind down? Ladies and gentlemen, are we ready to unwind? Just let our head down a bit. So 7:30, I promise that when you come here, you will not recognize this place, because we're going to celebrate AU Day like never before. From that, we would, I think, close at 9 o'clock, and tomorrow we will start at exactly 8:30. Registrations will start, and at 9:30 we'll begin the first plenary. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, let's go out there, let's freshen up, and 7:30 we'll reconvene. Thank you very much for your time. I'll see you shortly.